Chapter 558. The journey back was quite smooth. They didn't encounter any robbers or Rock Hill City people. Everyone was prepared for the dangerous animals and plants in the forest. However, the weather was getting hotter and hotter. Even the slippery moss on the ground had started to dry up. There were fights every day near the water source. The water Xiaoxian and the others fetched was stained with blood several times. This kind of weather made everyone's heart sink. Even the Yanjiao people who were originally happy from catching prey were not in a good mood. Especially Duo Kong. The winter he experienced last year was on the other end of the spectrum. He heard that it was even worse than last year. Maybe the other side of the sea was already covered in snow? When they returned to the tribe, Xiaoxian and the others found out that the situation in the forest was still good. When they entered the forest to search for the green-faced fanged beast, the stream that the tribe often fetched water from had dried up. There were 3 similar streams nearby that didn't have a single drop of water flowing. The tribe had to fetch water from further places. However, this was already considered good. At least the Yanjiao people were strong. It wasn't difficult for a team of warriors to go out and carry a few large tanks of water back. The expanded animal pens and fields could be used temporarily. There was no crisis. However, many tribes outside were not so good. The weather couldn't be changed. People were panicking. Many small tribes held ceremonies every few days, hoping to change the current situation through prayers and sacrifices. However, the weather didn't change. In fact, it was getting hotter. There was no rain. Not only were the animals in the forest fighting for water, but people were also fighting. It was said that in this unusually hot and dry winter, there were more tribes fighting than before. The reason was mostly because of the water source. Most tribes were located near water sources. In the past, when there was no water shortage, it was fine. However, now that there was such a situation, the conflicts escalated. After all, not every tribe was as close to the forest as Yanjiao. In order to survive, fighting was inevitable. After leaving the forest, the people from the other tribes did not stay in Yanjiao for long. Not only were they worried about the green-faced fanged beasts, but they were also worried about the harsh living conditions brought about by the current climate. They had to hurry back to their tribes as soon as possible. Fortunately, only a portion of the people had entered the forest. Every tribe had a portion of their people waiting in Yanjiao. There were also people who came to deliver their sincerity to help protect the green-faced fanged beasts, so that they wouldn't be kidnapped halfway. When survival became difficult, the number of robbers increased. They had no choice but to be more prepared. After the people from the other tribes left, the Flaming Horn tribe began to prepare for the upcoming battle. The green-faced fanged beast that he had been looking forward to all day was finally back. It was time for the next step. Since the green-faced fanged beast's blood was special, it would evaporate before it could be used. Due to the lack of time, it was easy to make mistakes during the forging process, so it was best to extract some of the blood first. For this reason, Xiaoxian used a bamboo tube to make a simple syringe. It was as thick as a child's arm and nearly half a meter long. The inside of the syringe was polished and cleaned many times to prevent too many impurities from affecting the forging process. The piston was made of resin, taken directly from the plants in the forest, and connected to the piston rod. The needle was made from a type of bird's bone. Their bones were hollow. He chose a bone that was thin and hard enough. One end was connected to the syringe, and the other end was sharpened to make it easier for the needle to pierce. If it was too thin, it wouldn't be hard enough and would break easily. After it was done, Xiaoxian tried a few times to get some water. It was okay, it didn't leak. Seeing Xiaoxian make something like this, everyone felt very curious. When Xiaoxian used the syringe to get water, they knew what it was for. Naturally, they were very excited. Of the 9 green-faced fanged beasts, 2 were given to the Hui tribe, so there were 7 left. Now, 7 of them were still unconscious. When Xiaoxian and the rest came back, they showed signs of waking up. They only calmed down after a few injections. It was very strange. The green-faced fanged beasts rarely opened their mouths except when they were eating. Even when they were asleep, their mouths were tightly shut and only their nostrils were breathing. Xiaoxian wanted to give them some medicine, but he couldn't. He could only prick them. "You can just use this?" Ao and Zheng Luo stood behind Xiaoxian, watching him suck the water out of the jar with the syringe and then inject it into another jar. "Let's try it." Xiaoxian wasn't sure before trying it. Who knew if the green-faced fanged beast's blood would react with the bamboo and resin? Drag one over. Xiao Xian gestured for Duo Kong to get the prey. Duo Kong glanced at the 7 green-faced fanged beasts on the ground and picked the fattest one. It happened to be the first one Xiao Xian caught, the one with a broken fang. Although it no longer had a round belly and had lost a lot of weight, it was still a lot fatter than the others. It was no wonder Duo Kong picked it and carried it over. Looking at the green-faced fanged beasts in front of him, Xiao Xian thought that if he could successfully extract their blood this way, he wouldn't have to kill them all at once. After all, he didn't know how much to use and when to use it. He had to try again and again, and if he failed, he would have to start all over again. 7 seemed like a lot, but if he failed every time, would he have to go back into the forest to catch more? He had only been back for less than a day. Xiao Xian squatted down and avoided its long fangs. He looked at the distribution of its bones and determined where its internal organs might be. Then he took out a dagger and made a cut on its chest. It wasn't a deep cut. It only broke the skin, and not much blood flowed out. The skin of the green-faced fanged beast was too thick, and the bones Xiao Xian picked were thin. To prevent the needle from breaking, he first used the dagger to break the skin. Green blood flowed out, and soon it made a sizzling sound. It was like boiling water, and it evaporated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ao and Zheng Luo had only heard about it before. Now that they saw it with their own eyes, they knew how special this beast's blood was. The green-faced fanged beast's self-healing speed was very fast. Xiao Xian didn't wait for the wound to heal before stabbing it in. He didn't pierce it too deeply. The needle went in at a slanted angle. As he inserted the needle, Xiao Xian pulled the plunger out of the syringe. Although he couldn't see what was going on inside the bamboo tube, Xiao Xian could feel if there was blood flowing out when he pulled the plunger. When he felt that there was blood flowing into the bamboo tube, the force needed to pull the plunger would be much smaller. It would be even better if the needle pierced into the blood vessels. Feeling the blood flowing into the bamboo tube, Xiao Xian sighed in relief. This method was still feasible. This was just an experiment. Xiao Xian kept the needle in the same position as when the blood was flowing out. After drawing out nearly 1/3 of the blood, he stopped. The wound on the green-faced fanged beast had healed. When Xiao Xian pulled out the needle, it took some effort, and he almost broke the needle. After pulling out the needle, the wound on the green-faced fanged beast's body healed quickly. There were no visible marks on the punctured area. Xiao Xian pushed the plunger of the syringe and squeezed out half a drop of green blood. There was a sizzling sound in the air. Soon, the drop of blood evaporated and sealed the needle. There was no more sizzling sound. This proved that the blood in the bamboo tube was still there for the time being. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. This method worked. It meant that they could use this method to extract blood and send it to the casting room to be used during casting. Chapter 559. Once the blood had been extracted, the casting process would begin soon. They did not know how long the blood would last in the bamboo tube, nor could they guarantee that the blood would not deteriorate. That was why they had to start as soon as possible. In the casting room, all unrelated people were chased out. Even if they wanted to watch, they could only wait outside. Other than the 2 chiefs and the 3 team leaders, the other team leaders could only walk around in circles, craning their necks, but to no avail. The casting process was still the same as the slave master's mud casting method. They poured molten alloy liquid into the mold. Most of the casting materials were mud. However, this casting process was different from the past. Everyone was more careful with every step. This was an experiment using the green-faced fanged beast's blood. It was an important turning point. If they succeeded, the tribe's bronze wares would be upgraded to a higher level and the use of stone tools would gradually be replaced. After all, if the new bronze wares were hard enough and sharp enough, or as Gong Jiaheng said, if they could cut through stone, many people would choose to use bronze wares. The clay used for casting had been dried in the shade for a long time and repeatedly smashed to a high degree of maturity. The bronzeware made in the past had also proved its usefulness. It was not too wet and did not emit any gas, so the bronzeware made was still acceptable. This time, the mud used was more stringent in the process of sieving, rinsing, drying, and so on. The smelting process was the same as before. However, after the black gas, the yellow gas, the white gas, the green gas, and finally the green gas, the copper alloy was completely melted. According to the previous process, the casting process was ready. However, this time was different. Before the casting process, the green-faced fanged beast's blood would be added. When Xiao Xian saw the words on the mountain wall of Gongjia Valley, it mentioned when to add the beast's blood. However, it did not explain the details, so Xiao Xian could only guess. He removed the needle from the syringe. Green blood flowed out from where the needle was connected to the bamboo tube, making a sizzling sound. Just drip it? The craftsman beside him was so nervous he was stuttering. What else could he do? It was impossible for Xiao Xian to ask a Gongjia family member, so he could only try pouring it in. Xiao Xian held up the bamboo tube and let the beast blood drip out from the small hole connected to the needle into the molten copper alloy liquid. The sizzling green blood made the people who were staring at the scene feel as if their hearts were being roasted on a hot stone slab. It was a torment. He was nervous, anxious, and his entire body was stiff. He didn't dare to move or make a sound, for fear of disturbing the other side's movements. The blood dripping into the copper alloy liquid stopped abruptly with a sizzling sound. It did not evaporate like Xiao Xian and the others had expected. Instead, it spread out in the copper alloy liquid. Poof! As the blood gradually dripped down, a green flame suddenly emerged from the alloy liquid. The body of the flame was not very high. The layer of flame that was stuck to the surface of the alloy liquid was not even as high as the pinky finger. The fire was still burning, and the alloy was still melting. More and more blood dripped from the bamboo tube. The surface of the alloy liquid was covered in a layer of green flame. At the same time, the alloy liquid inside churned, but there were no bubbles. There was only a burning green flame. The color of the alloy liquid was changing. It darkened slightly and was no longer gold. As the alloy liquid churned, the color became uniform. When the beast blood was used up and there was no more, the green flame in the alloy liquid gradually disappeared. Then, the casting process would begin. Outside the forging room, Mai and the other team leaders, as well as Tuo, Xiang Chun, and the others who knew the secret of the metal wares, were all waiting outside. They wanted to listen in to satisfy their curiosity, but until now, there was nothing they wanted to know. The two leaders were too calm. Even if they exclaimed in surprise, it would have been better than remaining silent all the time. After a long while, the sound of forging came from the room. Forging, carving, annealing, sharpening. Although everyone was nervous, the work was carried out in an orderly manner. Other than giving instructions, no one asked or said anything else. The two chiefs also became a part of the background. They stared nervously at the broad copper knife that was almost finished. The knife looked rough and did not have much beauty. But in the eyes of the people in the room, it was a peerless beauty. It was different from the previous bronze wares. Although it was not finished, it gave people the feeling that it was on another level. In the sky outside the room, the sun was hanging high in the sky. At dusk, the afterglow of the setting sun shone everywhere. The shadows of the people waiting outside were elongated. Inside the room, Xiao Xian held the newly cast copper knife and wiped it with a piece of animal skin. The biggest difference between this saber and the bronze weapons from before, and also the most eye-catching part of it, was its color. It was not gold, nor was it silver-white, silver-gray, or even reddish like the other bronze wares. It was green. The overbearing broad blade was dark green in color. It was reserved, but it was ferocious. Xiao Xian stared at the knife, his eyes reflecting the cold light of the knife. He threw away the animal skin he was wiping and ran his fingers along the edge of the knife. Then he flicked it lightly. It was like the whistling of the wind, but also the vibrating sound of the sharp blade. When it reached his ears, it felt like something was charging through his blood. Green bronze wares. Most bronzes would only turn green after they had rusted. But now, this newly forged bronze saber was actually a deep dark green color. Did it succeed? That was the question everyone wanted to know. The chiefs and team leaders did not know. Only Xiao Xian and the craftsmen who were in charge of hammering and carving knew that this knife was much harder than the other bronze wares. Xiao Xian's gaze moved away from the knife and looked at Ao and Zhengluo, who were standing silently at the side. It was not that the two chiefs were not anxious. They were too nervous and impatient to react. Now, seeing Xiao Xian look over, Ao hurriedly took out a fist-sized stone he had prepared and threw it. This was one of the testing stones in the stone room. It was a medium-grade stone. Ordinary bronze wares would be tested with a medium-grade stone. After all, the sharpness and hardness of ordinary bronze wares were limited and could not be forced. Because he was too nervous, Ao's action of throwing the stone was very stiff. But at this time, no one cared about Ao's action of throwing the stone. They stared at the stone that was thrown up, and then looked at the knife in Xiao Xian's hand. Their eyes swept back and forth quickly, for fear of missing any details. At that moment, they even forgot to breathe. Xiao Xian held the bronze knife with both hands, took a step forward, raised it, and then chopped down at the stone in the air. Bang! The blade struck the rock hard, and the fist-sized rock broke into two halves. Clean, neat, and smooth. And there was not a single scratch on the blade. Whether it was sharpness or hardness, it was much stronger than the previous bronze wares. Chapter 560. The first stone was a medium-grade stone. Even if it could be cut with bronze tools, it would not be able to cut a stone of this grade in half so easily. The breathing of the people in the room suddenly became heavy as they stared at the cyan bronze knife in Xiao Xian's hand. Let's try again. Xiao Xian gestured for Zheng Luo to bring the stone closest to the edge of the shelf. The stones placed there were at least medium-grade stones. There were also some scraps of high-quality stones left over from the polishing of tools. They were placed here as testing stones. When they heard that Xiao Xian was going to test his knife with medium-grade stones, the two chiefs' hearts ached. What if the knife bent? What if there was a nick in the knife? However, after Xiao Xian tested his knife, they fell silent. Because he was worried about his knife, Zheng Luo tossed a medium-grade stone up. It was still a little off from a high-grade stone, but Xiao Xian's bronze knife easily left a nick in it. Although it did not cut the stone in half like before, the result was enough to satisfy everyone in the room. This knife is similar to the one Gong Jiaheng made, right? Zheng Luo took the knife from Xiao Xian and carefully touched the spot where he cut the stone. There was no nick. Back when they were on the other side of the sea, Gong Jiaheng had returned from Gongjia Valley to visit the Flaming Horn tribe. The rock he used to test his sword on was also above average grade and had a similar hole. That was why Zheng Luo was reminded of what happened back then. That was made by the Gongjia craftsman, and the one in his hand was no worse than the one the craftsman made. Zheng Luo was instantly filled with pride and heroism. He wanted to shout out loud to let the world know. Look, this is a weapon made by the Yanjiao tribe. It's no worse than the Gongjia people. In terms of craftsmanship, Yanjiao could not compare to the talented Gongjia family. However, they had other ways to close the gap. Look, isn't it done? Of course, if Gong Jiaheng had green-faced fanged beast blood, he could definitely make better weapons. But they didn't have that. Zheng Luo and Duo Kong couldn't help but feel smug. If the Taihe people were here, they would probably be shocked. After all, the Taihe tribe had always been better than the Yanjiao tribe in terms of farming and casting. They really wanted to see their expressions. What a pity. He couldn't see her. Zheng Luo reluctantly handed the knife to Ao. He had already seen it. There were others waiting to see the first Yanjiao bronze knife. Opening the door to the stone house, Zheng Luo had a complicated smile on his face. His steps were light, and he shook as he walked, causing the small leaders outside to glance at him. However, their gazes quickly shifted to the stone house. Zheng Luo had already come out, and the door was open. Did that mean the things were done? Judging from Chief Zheng Luo's reaction, did he succeed? Hence, after Zheng Luo left, the people who had been anxiously waiting outside also swarmed in. Xiao Xian did not continue to stay inside. He had to check on the green-faced fanged beasts. According to the plan they had discussed, they would make a bronze weapon every day. This meant that he had to take a bamboo tube of beast blood every day for at least 6 days. Now, the tribe's attitude towards the 7 green-faced fanged beasts was not to kill them straight away. They were going to adopt a sustainable development strategy and try their best to raise them. When Xiao Xian came back, he brought back a few stalks of grass that the green-faced fanged beasts liked to eat. He had already planted them in the tribe, but they were not growing well. He wasn't sure if they could survive. Even if they could, those few stalks would not be enough to satisfy the 7 beasts. He just didn't know what else the beasts ate other than that grass. If these beasts were too picky, they would not be able to implement a sustainable development strategy. They would have to take their blood and cook them. Otherwise, they would starve to death. Right, he did not know if the meat of the green-faced fanged beasts could be eaten. Xiao Xian remembered that when he was in the fearsome beast forest, the bodies of the beasts were not complete. Most of them had evaporated along with the blood. Forget it, he would think about it later. Let's see if they ate other things first. While Xiao Xian was thinking about how to better implement a sustainable development strategy, a new atmosphere was spreading in the tribe. The successful casting of the new bronze wares was indeed inspiring. Its production was of great significance to the entire tribe. As long as one was a tribesman, they all knew that this would be a turning point. The innovation of tools would begin from here on out. The news of the success of the new bronze weapon was not made public. Only the higher-ups of the tribe and those who participated in the mission knew about it. Most people did not know about it. However, they could see that the leaders of the tribe who were originally gloomy due to the weather suddenly smiled brightly today. After the success of the first sword, Xiao Xian used the same method to take blood from the green-faced fanged beasts in the next few days. This way, he could take blood and ensure that the beasts would not be seriously injured. With the experience of the previous day, Xiao Xian took less blood in the next few days than the first day. This was because he found that after adding beast blood into the molten alloy liquid, there would be a saturation state. When the beast blood mixed with the alloy liquid and reached a saturated state, adding more beast blood would only cause the green flame to continue, and the alloy liquid would no longer tumble and fuse. After that, the new bronze weapons such as knives and axes were successfully cast. This proved Xiao Xian's guess. This also gave everyone a clear understanding of the use of beast blood. They could roughly calculate how much beast blood was needed for the alloy liquid. In 7 days, Xiao Xian took 7 vials of beast blood from 7 green-faced fanged beasts. The 7 beasts were still unconscious. Including the big sword on the first day, a total of 7 weapons were made in 7 days. Most of them were large swords and axes. They were at least twice as large as the ones used by other tribesmen. After all, the Yanjiao people were very strong, and the weapons used by ordinary people were too light for them. The shape of the swords and axes came from the requirements of the warriors. It came from the habits of the warriors in the process of survival. They knew better than anyone what kind of weapon was best for them. However, 7 weapons were still not enough for everyone to share. They already had the leaders, the team leaders, and the other warriors who had made contributions. When everyone was about to start the second round of forging, the 7 green-faced fanged beasts finally woke up. After they woke up, although they were not in a good state of mind, they were still grumpy and wanted to bite everything they saw. Taking a vial of blood still affected them. The first beast whose blood was taken was still okay. After all, it had woken up in the middle of hibernation to look for food. However, the other 6 beasts were different. They were woken up in the middle of hibernation and were caught before they could look for food. When they were in the fearsome beast forest, they had consumed a lot of energy. Now, they were very hungry and looked around with green eyes. Chapter 561. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts woke up probably because they were starving and had their blood drawn. Although they didn't seem to be in a good mental state, their eyes were still ferocious. Their green, wrinkled faces looked even more ferocious. Their 2 big fangs made a crackling sound in the air. They seemed to be very unstable in their irritation. What should we do? Duo Kong threw the grass in his hand to the ground and scratched his head impatiently as he asked Xiao Xian. Now, it was difficult to even get close to the 7 green-faced fanged beasts, let alone feed them. As soon as they got close, the 7 beasts would shake their fangs and stab them as if they had seen their enemy. Although the 7 beasts were tied up tightly, and even if they shook their heads, the angle was limited and they couldn't hurt anyone. But now, the 7 beasts were completely uncooperative. The grass that Duo Kong threw in front of them was the freshest grass he had gotten from the mountains early in the morning. The beasts in the animal pen outside the forest liked to eat this grass. Unfortunately, the 7 beasts didn't appreciate it at all. They didn't even look at it and tried to stab Duo Kong with their fangs. This grass doesn't look that different. Why aren't they eating it? Duo Kong sat cross-legged on the ground and looked at the 7 beasts who were glaring at him. How about I go and pull some of that grass over? Mai asked. It was just planted. Plus, there are only a few of them over there. Even if they eat it, there isn't enough grass. Duo Kong shook his head. He didn't think it was a good idea. If the 7 green-faced fanged beasts continued to be like this, not letting anyone get close to them, being hostile to everyone, and being picky about their food, they could only cook them. Even if they couldn't cook them, they could still keep their fangs and bones to make bone tools. Xiao Xian looked at the 7 green-faced fanged beasts that were struggling and breathing hard. He decided to give it a try. For the past few days, he had been thinking about how to deal with the 7 green-faced fanged beasts. There was a huge demand for new bronzes in the tribe, and it was not a good idea to go back and catch the green-faced fanged beasts now. The weather was getting hotter and hotter, and the beasts in the forest were fighting for water. The fighting was getting more intense, and the hinterland of the forest was getting more dangerous. It was not a good time to enter the forest. If they could raise these 7 beasts and take their blood every 7 days, these 7 beasts would continue to live, and the tribe would be able to obtain what they wanted from them. If he wanted to raise it for a long time, he couldn't keep it tied up all the time. It would be best if it was obedient. To make them more obedient, it was impossible to domesticate them. Their tempers had long been cultivated. Xiao Xian thought about it, and there was only one way: to enslave them. Jiju had once said that the first slave would be the most loyal of all the slaves, and the one with the closest connection to the slave master's consciousness. No matter how good the other slaves were, they would always be a little worse. This was the commonality of slavery, so when choosing the first slave, one must be very cautious. However, Xiao Xian already had his first slave, and his loyalty was indeed very high. Other than that, Xiao Xian really hadn't enslaved anyone else. Jiju had also warned Xiao Xian that other than the first slave, the slaves enslaved later had limited loyalty. They might even betray the slave master. Moreover, wantonly enslaving slaves would cause their own characteristics and strengths to be scattered, and the connection between their consciousness would not be tight enough. When choosing to enslave a slave, one had to think more. Xiao Xian didn't want to enslave anyone for the time being, but these green-faced fanged beasts were worth a try. 7 wasn't a lot, and it was much better than enslaving hundreds of people in the desert. It didn't matter if the connection between their consciousness wasn't tight enough. Xiao Xian didn't want them to fight or work. He just didn't know if they would be obedient after being enslaved. He had to give it a try. Xiao Xian told the chief and team leader of his thoughts. Although the tribesmen rejected the slave masters, it was only directed at those in the desert and some people on the other side of the sea, not Xiao Xian. The tribesmen's rejection of the slave masters was attributed to the tribesmen's xenophobic ideology. Subconsciously, the tribesmen never regarded Xiao Xian as a slave master. Xiao Xian was a Yanjiao. Even if he could enslave slaves, he was still a Yanjiao. How could he be a slave master? No matter who said it, they wouldn't admit it. This was completely according to their own classification. Not to mention Xiao Xian, even if other people in the tribe, such as the shaman, chief, team leader, or other warriors could be enslaved, the tribesmen wouldn't admit that they were slave masters. No matter what others said, they wouldn't admit it. They were clearly their own people, Yanjiao tribesmen. No matter what you said, the Yanjiao people wouldn't listen. They were stubborn and stubborn to the end. When they found out that Xiao Xian also knew the method of enslavement, Duo Kong and the others also wanted to learn. Unfortunately, they couldn't learn it, and in the end, they just left it as it was. Now, other than Xiao Xian, there were other people in the tribe who could use the method of enslavement, such as the 2 shamans, Guizhe, and a few other warriors. However, the success rate wasn't high, and most importantly, those people weren't as reliable as Xiao Xian. Instead of asking them to enslave the green-faced fanged beasts, it was better to let Xiao Xian give it a try. At the place where the green-faced fanged beasts were tied up, there was no one else other than Xiao Xian and a few other leaders. There were also warriors guarding outside, and they wouldn't let unrelated people near. Xiao Xian glanced at the green-faced fanged beasts and walked to the one with a broken tooth. Seeing Xiao Xian, the green-faced fanged beast probably recognized him. It struggled hard, and the murderous intent in its eyes shot out. If it wasn't tied up at this moment, it would probably rush towards Xiao Xian and fight to the death. Unfortunately, now that it was tied up, it wasn't in good spirits. After struggling for so long, it was hungry and weak, and its strength was a lot weaker. It couldn't attack Xiao Xian. Staring at the green-faced fanged beast in front of him, Xiao Xian reached out his hand. Xiao Xian hadn't used the power of enslavement for a long time, and according to the rules of power flow in his memory, he slowly mobilized the power of inheritance. Xiao Xian's aura suddenly changed in an instant. In his mind, the totem flame violently rolled, and the shell wrapped around the totem flame became brighter. 5 blue flames came out of it, and the momentum was like a dragon. They rushed directly through his arm and reached Xiao Xian's 5 fingers. Puff! The blue flames came out of Xiao Xian's hand. The green-faced fanged beast that was struggling to breathe suddenly seemed to be extinguished. Not only the one in front of Xiao Xian, but the other 6 also stopped struggling, and their eyes were fixed on Xiao Xian. The blue flames wrapped around his hand, and he reached out to the green-faced fanged beast in front of him. Whoosh! A gust of wind suddenly blew in the house, and there seemed to be layers of ripples flashing in the air. The few warriors guarding outside the house were a little uncertain when they heard the wind. They looked at the trees and the weeds on the ground outside, and they didn't move much. How could they hear the wind? However, the wind was getting louder and louder, and the warriors guarding the house couldn't ignore it. Some of the small gaps in the house's doors and windows were pushed out, making a sharp sound, as if something was roaring and was about to rush out. Chapter 562. When the wind stopped blowing, the enslavement of the 7 green-faced fanged beasts was complete. However, the 7 green-faced fanged beasts were unconscious again. The specific results of the enslavement could only be determined after they woke up. Xiao Xian could feel the connection between his consciousness and the 7 green-faced fanged beasts. Although it was not as close as the first enslaved sapphire, he could still roughly understand their situation. The enslavement was successful, but these 7 beasts might not be as obedient as everyone expected. Fortunately, these 7 beasts were still very strong. They would be fine even if they were starved for 2 more days. Xiao Xian was sure of this. The next day, Xiao Xian received a report and once again went to the house where the green-faced fanged beasts were kept. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts had already woken up. Duo Kong and the others were still standing at a safe distance, looking at the green-faced fanged beasts and waiting for Xiao Xian's confirmation. Everyone was still very nervous about how obedient these 7 new slaves would be. It would be great if they were as obedient as Sapphire. After all, the green-faced fanged beasts were too aggressive. Their fangs were also dangerous. It would be bad if they stabbed the people in the tribe. The obvious difference between these 7 beasts and yesterday was that their eyes were not as fierce as before. Especially after Xiao Xian's appearance, they were much more restrained. The frequency of their nostrils snorting decreased. When Xiao Xian approached, they did not struggle. This was a good sign. Xiao Xian walked over. The first one he picked was the one with a broken tooth. As Xiao Xian approached, the green-faced fanged beast only shook a little, as if it wanted to avoid him. In the end, it stopped and did not move again. Xiao Xian reached out his hand and approached the vine rope tied to the green-faced fanged beast. It just looked at him and did not intend to attack. The fanged beast did not point in the direction of Xiao Xian either. Seeing that everyone in the house was ready to defend, Xiao Xian untied the vine rope on the green-faced fanged beast. During the process, he also paid attention to the connection between him and the green-faced fanged beast. After confirming that it was not aggressive, he released the vine rope. Patter! The ropes that bound the green-faced fanged beast's head and forelimbs fell to the ground. It seemed to want to run away, but Xiao Xian held it down. If it had been in the past, it would have definitely turned its head and stabbed Xiao Xian with its fangs. But now, it only struggled a little and remained in the position where Xiao Xian held it down. Not only was there no ferocity in its eyes, but it was also puzzled, as if it did not understand why Xiao Xian held it down and did not allow it to move. Seeing this, the 2 leaders and the team leaders felt relieved. Then joy appeared on their faces. No matter what the final result was, they were already very satisfied with this level of enslavement. Compared to the situation yesterday where they were struggling and shaking their fangs with all their might, the ones in front of him now were really too obedient. Seeing that the result was satisfactory and in line with his expectations, Xiao Xian untied the vine rope that bound its hind legs. After being tied up for so long, the green-faced fanged beast supported itself on the ground with its 4 hooves and stood up uncomfortably. The leaders and team leaders next to them tightened their grip on their weapons and stared at the green-faced fanged beast that had already stood up, guarding against any sudden attacks. Xiao Xian was also on guard. Although the consciousness that connected with the green-faced fanged beast did not have any intention of attacking, it was still better to be cautious. The green-faced fanged beast that finally stood up on its 4 hooves. It was unknown whether it was because it was too hungry or because it had been tied up for too long that its whole body was stiff. It walked a few steps unnaturally, then with a whoosh, it ran away. Xiao Xian put down his sword because he didn't receive any attack from it. The chiefs and leaders in the house could see that the green-faced fanged beast was just trying to run around. It wasn't trying to attack them. Xiao Xian's order to them, "Don't attack the people of the Flaming Horns tribe at will," was indeed carried out. After running around the room like the wind, the green-faced fanged beast walked to Xiao Xian's side and looked at Xiao Xian. What does it want to do? Zheng Luo did not understand the green-faced fanged beast's behavior and asked. It's hungry. Xiao Xian said. It wants to show that it's very hungry right now. Then what should we do? Duo Kong pulled his hair in frustration. They didn't eat the grass I cut. They didn't even smell it. There was still grass that Duo Kong had cut early in the morning on the ground. But when the green-faced fanged beast ran around the room, it directly ran past the grass on the ground and did not even look at it. Let's not worry about that for now. Xian, untie the rest. Ao said. The first problem in front of them was not solved yet. How could they think about the next one? They had to first determine how many of the 7 beasts were successfully enslaved. If any one of them still attacked, then they would have to kill it first. Today's blood had not been drawn yet, and the forging room was still waiting. Okay, Xiao Xian nodded. He had the same idea. Just like the previous one, when Xiao Xian enslaved the next beast, he also untied the vines in front of them. Although it was safer to untie the vines in front of their legs first, it was not easy to identify them. If he untied the vines in front of them first, they would immediately express their intentions. After their heads and necks were freed, if they had the slightest intention to attack, they would immediately execute it. This was more accurate. With their hind legs tied, even if they still wanted to attack, their movements would be greatly restricted. Fortunately, the other 6 beasts did not express any intention to attack, at least not yet. Xiao Xian picked up the vines on the ground and looped them around their necks one by one. Then he held the other end of the 7 vines. Okay, the first problem is solved. Now we should think about what to feed them. Zheng Luo sighed. If they wanted to raise these 7 beasts, they had to feed them, right? What should they feed them? The problem now is not what to feed them, but what do they want to eat? Xiao Xian pulled on one of the vines, indicating that the green-faced fanged beast should not move. They are hungry and their tempers are worse. Other than the grass in the forest, what else could they feed the green-faced fanged beasts? This problem was too difficult. For a moment, the room was silent. Everyone was thinking hard, thinking about the plants they had seen. Which one could possibly make the green-faced fanged beasts open their mouths? The grain stored in the tribe, they did not eat. The freshly cut grass, they did not eat. The fruits picked in the forest, they still did not eat. Then what did they eat? Since we can't guess what would make them open their mouths, then let them find it themselves. Xiao Xian stood up and looked at the chiefs and team leaders in the room. First, let them go to the fields to take a look. In order to let these green-faced fanged beasts go to the fields to find food, they must first disperse the unrelated people in the fields, especially those who had not awakened their totemic powers. They must be kept away first, or else, if they were not careful, they would be in trouble. Those people could not take a stab from the green-faced fanged beasts. Chapter 563. On this day, everyone in the Yanjiao tribe, whether they lived in the forest or outside the forest, were told to stay at home and not go out for the time being. Many people in the tribe panicked, worried that something big had happened. The wanderers who went to work every day also panicked. They relied on their labor in exchange for food from the Yanjiao tribe. They couldn't help but wonder what had happened when the Yanjiao suddenly sent out such a message. Were there bandits again? It shouldn't be. Even if there were bandits, it wouldn't be like this. Was there something dangerous? No matter how curious they were or what they thought, since the tribe had sent out this message, they had to do as they were told. For a moment, the forest was much quieter. In order to avoid provoking the green-faced fanged beasts, the tribe sent Caesar and the other beasts away. They didn't let them see each other. The patrolling warriors were guarding everywhere with shields and nets ready in case the green-faced fanged beasts suddenly went berserk. They could subdue them as soon as possible. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts were all taller than Xiao Xian's waist. The biggest one was as tall as Xiao Xian's chest. The rattan rope was thicker than an adult's arm. It was one of the toughest vines used to tie ferocious beasts in the tribe. It was impossible for Xiao Xian to grab all 7 rattan ropes at once. That would be inconvenient, so he simply tied one end of the 7 rattan ropes together. He only needed to control the knots made by the 7 rattan ropes. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts were very excited when they were finally released. They wanted to fly away immediately, but their necks were tied and the other end of the rope was firmly controlled by Xiao Xian. They couldn't run away. After being enslaved, the slaves were afraid of their masters, so they didn't dare to use their fangs to break the vines. However, once they slowed down, they couldn't fly anymore. So, when Xiao Xian led the 7 green-faced fanged beasts out, this was what the tribesmen saw. 7 ferocious-looking creatures with green faces, slanted eyes, long fangs, and ferocious expressions were rapidly swinging their short and thick limbs. The grass on the ground was kicked into pieces, and hot air was blowing out from their large nostrils. The vine rope was tightened, and it let out a creaking sound. Fortunately, it was strong enough that it did not break. "Is everything ready?" Xiao Xian looked at Duo Kong, who was running over from outside the forest. "All right, other than the patrol team and the guards there is no one else." Duo Kong rubbed his hands and stared at the 7 green-faced fanged beasts eagerly. He kept muttering in his heart, "Choose something to eat. Don't choose nothing. How are we going to raise them?" After getting a definite answer, Xiao Xian walked forward. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts had already kicked out 4 holes in the ground. Now that Xiao Xian moved, they became even more active and wanted to rush forward. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian holding them back, they would have run away again. Xiao Xian originally thought that the green-faced fanged beasts would sniff around when they were looking for food, but this was not the case. Other than the short pause when they were released, they tried to rush out of the forest. The 7 of them were running in the same direction. They did not run in different directions like Xiao Xian thought. Xiao Xian followed them outside. Because they were walking on a paved road, there were no trees in the way, so this part of the journey was very smooth. They wanted to walk in a straight line, but if they walked in that direction, they would go off the road and into the forest. There would be more trees to interfere with them, and the 7 vine ropes might even entangle them. What Xiao Xian did was to pull them back every time they ran out of the path. 7 green-faced fanged beasts pulling them together. If it was someone from another tribe, they might not be able to handle it alone. After the patrolling warriors saw this, they discussed it with their companions. "I heard that those things can fly on the grass, but they look very heavy, and I don't see them flying. But why are the chiefs and leaders following us? They seem very nervous." Finally, they were out of the forest. There were no trees around, so Xiao Xian did not force them to follow the path anymore. Instead, he followed them. There was a lot of farmland outside the forest. It was reclaimed after the destruction of the Wancher tribe. In the direction where the green-faced fanged beasts ran, the planting time was relatively late. Most of the seeds were planted with the seeds given by Jiju. They felt that this winter would not be too cold, so they tried to plant them. There were not many of them, and the area was not big. The planned plots of farmland were guarded by warriors. In the past, there would be tribesmen working here, but today they were all chased back home. Xiao Xian knew what kind of crops were planted on each plot of land. He had already prepared an animal skin roll, and on it, there were plots of farmland. When he led the green-faced fanged beasts through the farmland, 2 green-faced fanged beasts stopped running next to a field. They wanted to rush into the field, but the other 5 beasts did not seem to want to stop. Xiao Xian made a mark on this piece of land on the animal skin roll, and then asked the warriors guarding there to cut a few leaves from the ground. Because these were planted late, the seedlings were not tall, and the leaves were not big. Xiao Xian handed 2 narrow leaves, about the length of a finger, to the 2 green-faced fanged beasts that stopped just now. These 2 beasts sniffed the leaves, then opened their mouths a little and bit the leaves into their mouths. Looking at the way they ate, it seemed like they were forcing themselves to eat. As for the other 5 beasts, they did not even force themselves to eat. They simply sniffed and did not open their mouths. They struggled with the vine rope and wanted to run forward. No matter what, at least 2 beasts could open their mouths. The chief and team leaders behind suddenly let out a long sigh of relief, and a smile appeared on their faces. Xiao Xian continued to walk forward. Every time a green-faced fanged beast stopped, he would do the same test. Then, according to the reaction of the 7 beasts, he would make a mark on the animal skin roll. How many green-faced fanged beasts were interested in a particular plant, and which ones they were interested in, were all recorded. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts seemed to have different interests in different crops. Just like how people have different tastes, some like salty food, some like sweet food. Until now, other than the grass they ate in the hinterland of the forest, they did not have any other interests in common. The chief and team leaders behind felt that these 7 beasts were too troublesome to raise. The food they fed was different, and they all picked the precious crops from the seeds of the Ji family on the other side of the sea. In such a strange climate, When people in small tribes had to eat tree bark and soil, they still had to feed the beasts with precious crops? It was too extravagant. Seeing that they were still struggling, Duo Kong and the others couldn't help but want to go over and twist their heads off. Moreover, a beast ate better than them. What kind of feeling was that? They had never thought about it before. If someone had told Duo Kong this before, he would have thought that the person who did this was crazy. But now they were willing to be cheated. The Yanjiao people had mixed feelings. However, for the sake of the new bronze wares, they endured it. Eating good food and being picky was better than not eating anything at all. Now, the Yanjiao people wanted to worship these 7 beasts. After all, their blood was precious, and the casting of the new bronze wares could not be done without them. While everyone had mixed feelings, the 7 green-faced fanged beasts led by Xiao Xian stopped at the same place at the same time. Everyone raised their heads and looked in front of them. It was a fence made of tall wooden stakes. This was the place where Xiao Xian had knocked out Robber 7 with a slap. Chapter 564. Looking at the field that was surrounded by tall wooden stakes, the chiefs and leaders looked at each other, then became excited again. It was rare to find food that all 7 green-faced fanged beasts liked. Before this, they had already prepared for the complicated rearing work. Now that they suddenly saw such a scene, how could they not be happy? If the 7 green-faced fanged beasts were all interested in the cabbage planted in the field, then it would indeed be a happy thing. After all, they had transplanted a lot of cabbages, big and small. Because the meaning of this cabbage was different from other crops, the people in the tribe planned to label it as Yanjiao. They took care of it carefully and even sent people to guard it. When they first transplanted the cabbages, many of the leaves were incomplete and the growth of the cabbages was slow. After entering the rapid growth period here, they completely changed. When they were transplanted, the cabbages that were less than the height of a knee were now half the height of a person. Moreover, as long as they had enough water and nutrients, they would continue to grow quickly. The 2 shamans had planned to wait until the end of winter and during the sacrifice ceremony to give some of the cabbages to the people in the tribe as a souvenir. But if the cabbages in the field were interested in the green-faced fanged beasts, then the original plan would have to be changed. No matter what, they had to see if the 7 beasts were interested in the cabbages in the field. Xiao Xian gestured to the warriors guarding the cabbage field to pick a few cabbage leaves. He especially emphasized, pick the old leaves on the outside first. Don't break the leaves on the ball of cabbage. In addition to the ball of cabbage in the middle, there were also some leaves that extended outwards. Xiao Xian was referring to these leaves that did not form a ball. With the green cabbage leaves in hand, the 7 green-faced fanged beasts stared at the leaves in Xiao Xian's hand. However, they still glanced at the cabbage field from time to time. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts did open their mouths when they saw the cabbage that Xiao Xian handed over. They even seemed to like it. Although it might not be their favorite, they were picky eaters. Being able to accept the same kind of plant made the Yanjiao people very happy. After they finished eating the first few pieces of old vegetable leaves, Xiao Xian handed them a piece of vegetable leaf that was broken off from the vegetable ball. Compared to the previous pieces, this one was much more tender. Obviously, the 7 green-faced fanged beasts preferred the latter. Not to mention the 7 green-faced fanged beasts. Even the tribesmen preferred the leaves on the vegetable balls. Should he give the cabbage to the 7 beasts while he gnawed on the old leaves outside? Just thinking about it made him feel unbalanced. Let's feed those old leaves first. We'll talk about it later, Xiao Xian said. The other chiefs and leaders had the same thought. Based on their current knowledge and outlook on life, this was the first time they encountered a situation where they ate worse than the ferocious beasts. Even those old vegetables could not be eaten by many people in the tribe. Moreover, the old leaves couldn't be picked recklessly. If the cabbage wanted to grow, it still needed these broad and green leaves to grow. Fortunately, today's goal was achieved. After walking around the field and counting, the only thing that the 7 green-faced fanged beasts liked was cabbage. As for the other crops, there were always a few among the 7 beasts that had different preferences. But it didn't matter. If the cabbage wasn't enough, they could use other crops to make up the numbers. Anyway, Xiao Xian had already recorded the preferences of the 7 beasts. These 7 beasts were also numbered with paint so that the people who fed them in the future would be able to match them. After solving the food problem of the green-faced fanged beasts, the worries in everyone's hearts were finally relieved. Because the green-faced fanged beasts had a bad temper, the tribe decided to raise them in another place. There were many mountains near the tribe, and there were large and small caves in the mountains. One of the caves in the mountains had been excavated by the tribesmen and was divided into several small rooms. One end of the room was blocked by a stone pillar, and the other end was opened up. When the green-faced fanged beasts were not hibernating, they liked to move around alone. Therefore, 7 small rooms were excavated so that they could have their own territory and avoid fighting. Right now, they were still hibernating. If they continued to sleep, they would like to huddle together, so the other end of the 7 small rooms would lead to the same empty room. They didn't know what the inside of the green-faced fanged beast's cave looked like. After the excavation, they put some hay in the same way as in the animal pens. Of course, compared to the hay in the tribe's animal pens, the grass in the green-faced fanged beast's cave was much better. They were all carefully selected. According to the tribesmen's thinking, they could eat worse food, but the weapons they used had to be better. Therefore, the grass in the animal pens of the food beasts was of lower quality. As for the 7 green-faced fanged beasts, they had to live in better conditions. If they fell sick, the blood they provided could affect the forging of the weapons. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts were placed in a new place. They were still not used to it, but right now what they cared about the most wasn't the cave, but their stomachs. Therefore, when the vegetables and grains were placed in their respective troughs, they didn't care about anything else. They just ate first. Xiao Xian saw the way the green-faced fanged beasts ate for the first time. It wasn't that their table manners were bad, they just ate a little faster. What surprised Xiao Xian was that their stomachs were inflated. The amount of food he fed them wasn't much. If it were other beasts or humans, this wouldn't happen. However, the green-faced fanged beasts were different. The amount of food they ate was much more exaggerated than the amount they ate. This reminded Xiao Xian of the situation when he first met Broken Fanged. It was blocked at the entrance of the cave because of its round stomach. Xiao Xian thought it ate too much, but now it seemed that even if they ate a lot, it wasn't as big as he thought. Fortunately, although the 7 of them had become bigger after eating, they hadn't reached the point where they were completely round. Without food, the 7 beasts threw a tantrum for a while. They even knocked over the stone troughs and poked a few holes in them. After venting, the 7 beasts ran to the innermost room covered with hay and huddled together to sleep. Xiao Xian went in to take a look. After about half a day, their swollen stomachs shrank. It was similar to what he saw in the forest. After sleeping for a day, the 7 beasts got up to eat again. This time, Xiao Xian put in almost a third more food than last time. After they ate, they slept for a longer time. After all, it was still their hibernation time. Because he was worried that it would be difficult to raise the 7 beasts in the beginning, Xiao Xian didn't take any more blood before they woke up. If he wanted to implement a sustainable development plan, he had to be patient. Sharpening the knife won't delay the work of cutting wood. He had to raise the 7 beasts first. Chapter 565. The Yanjiao tribesmen treated the 7 green-faced fanged beasts very well. It was rare for them to take care of the beasts so well. Xiao Xian even drew blood from them once. However, one day, the 7 green-faced fanged beasts fell asleep after eating their fill. Xiao Xian stopped drawing blood and let them continue their hibernation. He could feel that it would be a long time before the beasts woke up again. The second batch of green bronze wares were made. The first to receive them were naturally those with high positions and contributions in the tribe. The chief and the team leaders all received their wares, but there were close to 20 of the team leaders. There were too many people but not enough wares, so the chief and the team leaders distributed their old weapons for the team leaders to use first. Many of the weapons were made by Gong Jiaheng. Although they were not as good as Xiao Xian's sword, they were better than most of the bronze wares now. When there were no new bronze wares, the team leaders did not complain. It was already good enough to have them. Didn't they see how envious their subordinates were? The bronze wares and the green-faced fanged beasts were temporarily solved. However, there was another very serious problem. The weather. Yes, there were no snow walls taller than houses, so people would not freeze if they walked out. However, they were running towards the other extreme. Compared to the time when Xiao Xian and the rest returned from the forest, the weather was much hotter now. If a bird's egg was dropped on the ground and cracked, the egg would be cooked immediately. That was a muddy grassland. Many of the grass that was still green in the beginning of winter could not withstand the cold, but could not withstand the drought. Clumps of grass withered and died. The tribesmen cut them and tied them into bundles to be used as firewood. However, they had to avoid fires in dry weather. They were in the forest after all. If a fire broke out in this weather, the entire tribe would suffer. Hence, under Xiao Xian's suggestion, the tribe strengthened their management of the fire, especially the people who lived in the forest. They were all warned. According to the warriors who went out to scout, the fighting outside had become more and more intense. Before, it was only some small tribes that were fighting. Now, some large and medium-sized tribes had joined in the fight. Just like the rules in the forest, only the strong could have more resources. The weak could only stand aside and watch, praying that the strong could give them some leftovers. A few days ago, the Lu tribe sent people over with more than 30 dumb birds. They wanted to trade for water and some other things with the flaming horns. Due to the hot weather, the Lu tribe's large-scale breeding of all kinds of animals was not in good condition. However, the chief of the Lu tribe had made a wise decision this year. They had sold most of the animals in the tribe at the beginning, leaving behind only the young ones. Nearly half of the animals were sold to Yanjiao, and the other half were sold to various large and medium-sized tribes. Therefore, although the weather was getting hotter and hotter in winter, they could still maintain a normal life. Moreover, they had their own water source, a pool. The water came from underground and did not dry all year round. The people of the Lu tribe always had their own way of dealing with disasters, and they were agile enough. Their leaders were also very smart and decisive. Therefore, even if they encountered natural disasters, they would be able to avoid them smoothly. This was something that the other large tribes all knew. However, this year's weather was beyond the Lu tribe's imagination. They thought that even if it was hot this year, it would not be much hotter than last year. However, this was not the case. They were too naive. The hot Yangguang baked the earth every day. Many plants that were far from the water source and could not withstand the drought died because of the drought. Last year, a batch of them were eliminated. This year, even more were eliminated. Only those plants and animals that could withstand the drought could survive in this climate. It's dangerous. The person in charge of the transportation was Yan Jiao, who was familiar with Xiao Xian. After arriving at Yanjiao, Yan Jiao gulped down a bottle of water. It had been many days since he drank water like this. "Don't you have a pool? Why is there still water?" Duo Kong asked. If other tribes asked this question, Yan Jiao might not have told them the truth. However, the Yanjiao people were different. After interacting with them for so long, Yan Jiao had a good understanding of the Yanjiao people. He knew that they were just curious and did not want to pry any secrets from him. "It's almost dry." Yan Jiao sighed. "How is that possible?" Xiao Xian was surprised, but after thinking about it, it made sense. Many small rivers and streams in the forest had dried up, and in some karst caves, there were pools that seeped out from underground water. Now all of them had dried up, so it made sense that something like this had happened to the Lu tribe. "It's not just you guys. Even our chief didn't expect this to happen." Yan Jiao's eyes were filled with worry. When he realized that the water in the pool had decreased drastically, their chief made the decision to sell more of the tribe's reared beasts. Even though they might not be able to get anything they were satisfied with, they still insisted on this decision. Yan Jiao was still in charge of Yanjiao. Other tribes might hesitate, but the Yanjiao tribe would definitely be able to get these beasts. They could also trade for water and other resources from Yanjiao. After all, Yanjiao was in the fearsome beast forest. Was there any shortage of water in the forest? At least, that was what Yan Jiao thought. However, after hearing about the situation in the forest from Xiao Xian, everyone in the Lu tribe fell silent. The situation was worse than they thought. No wonder their chief made the decision to sell the reared beasts at such a low price. There would be even less water. The people in the tribe couldn't even satisfy their needs. Why would they care about the reared beasts? Therefore, the chief of the Lu tribe decided to keep the core cubs and sell the rest to reduce consumption. As long as their foundation wasn't shaken, their farm could still recover quickly. "Oh right, I see that the number of guards you have this time is more than double the number of guards you had before. Are there a lot of robberies?" asked Xiao Xian. Speaking of this, Yan Jiao was even more upset. "Don't mention it. We met several groups of people on the way. There were even some wanderers who were not afraid of death. They even came to rob us. Although they were forced to do so by life, no one would sympathize with people who threatened their own interests. Moreover, this world was cruel. Except for the people in the tribe, everyone else was an outsider. If they couldn't even protect their own people, What did the lives of outsiders have to do with them? Not to mention that those people wanted to rob them. Even if the people of the Lu tribe were easy to talk to, they wouldn't be entangled in this issue. After complaining, Yanju looked at Xiao Xian and the others with a serious face. You guys should be careful too. Many people are coming this way. There must be a lot of water in the ferocious beast forest. This was what many people thought. In their imagination, the forest must be full of moist moss, streams and rivers everywhere, and juicy plants and fruits. If everyone said so, then it must be the truth. When they were forced to a certain extent, the threat of the ferocious beasts in the forest became very faint in their minds. Some people even deliberately stopped thinking about the dangerous factors in the forest. In fact, the Yanjiao tribe had already strengthened the defense and patrols around the forest. However, after hearing Yanjiao's words, the Yanjiao tribe increased the number of guards and patrols again. In the tribe, there was no such thing as winning people by virtue. Survival was always accompanied by blood and killing. It could be foreseen that in the next period of time, the situation in the ferocious beast forest might be different. However, what Xiao Xian was thinking about the most now wasn't those people who went into the forest to look for water. The ferocious beast forest was so big that it didn't belong to only the Yanjiao tribe. If they could find water with their own strength, the Yanjiao tribe wouldn't interfere. As long as they didn't target the Yanjiao tribe wouldn't care. Moreover, the Yanjiao tribe's fighting strength was there for all to see. What Xiao Xian was most worried about was something that all the tribes had always been worried about but couldn't predict. The change of the weather was definitely a sign. The more severe the sign was, the more likely it was that the changes that might happen in the future would be so great that people couldn't predict it. Xiao Xian took out a straw rope woven from withered grass and tried to do a knot divination. However, halfway through the divination, the straw rope suddenly broke. It wasn't tangled up in a mess, but directly broken. There was even a section of the straw rope that was broken. This was the first time that Xiao Xian had encountered such a situation with the straw rope ever since he mastered the art of divination. This situation shocked Xiao Xian to the core. It was fine if he couldn't do a divination, but the change in the straw rope made Xiao Xian unable to calm down for a long time. Something big was going to happen, and that change was very close. Perhaps it would happen soon after the end of this climate change. Chapter 566. When the Lu tribesmen went back, Xiao Xian and a group of Yanjiao warriors saw them off and went out to see what the situation was like outside. Along the way, they encountered several waves of robbers. Just like what Yanjiao had said, those people were crazy and had lost their minds. They didn't even try to judge the difference in strength between the two sides. They just wanted to kill and rob. Among the robbers, there were warriors from unknown tribes, and there were also wanderers. It was not easy for wanderers, who were at the bottom of the food chain, to reach here alive. But when people lost their minds and became crazy, they would do unimaginable things. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't dare to attack the warriors of the tribe. That would be courting death. In addition, Xiao Xian saw some corpses that had been dead for a long time. The corpses were covered by flying insects that liked rotting flesh. Even the scavenger birds couldn't drive them away. Whether it was humans, animals, or insects, they were all driven to extremes by today's climate. They were so used to the weather that they couldn't adapt to the changes in the past 2 years. After going outside to take a look, Xiao Xian returned to the tribe. He saw the patrolling warriors standing in the shade of the trees, their eyes scanning the surroundings like eagles. They were more nervous than when he left the tribe. What happened? Xiao Xian asked a warrior who was patrolling the border of the tribe. Someone ambushed us. The team leaders have already brought people to guard the area. The person pointed. That's where the fight happened. Xiao Xian followed the warrior's finger. It was close to the place where the wanderers were placed when they first arrived. It was on the edge of the fearsome beast forest. The people who attacked the Yanjiao came from there. But as soon as they stepped into the Yanjiao territory, they were killed by the Yanjiao warriors who had been guarding there for a long time. There was the smell of blood around. Many flying insects and scavenger birds were wandering around. There were some broken stone knives and polished weapons on the ground. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for the Yanjiao people to be merciful, so Xiao Xian didn't ask anything else. He only asked how the bodies of the invaders were dealt with. On such a hot day, it was not a good idea to just leave it there. Moreover, they didn't know if those people were sick. According to the Lu tribesmen, Some of the tribes had fallen sick. How sick they were and how they got sick, the Lu tribesmen didn't know. However, they had to be prepared for the worst. When Xiao Xian arrived, Ao was commanding his men to drag the corpses of the intruders into the forest and feed them to the beasts. At Xiao Xian's suggestion, they dragged them out of the forest and set them on fire. There were many people who took the initiative to attack Yanjiao, but they were all killed one after another, including the tourists. In the wanderer area outside the forest, someone did not return after going out. When his family went out to look for him, they only found a skeleton. That wanderer knew someone. When the Yanjiao tribe first came here, they also came here together. However, the other wanderer left halfway to rely on another tribe. Now, the weather was abnormal and survival was difficult. The wanderer came back. Because the guards patrolling outside Yanjiao didn't allow outsiders to enter, he could only use a whistle to call for his old friend. The wanderer who lived in Yanjiao's territory was soft-hearted because of their old friendship. As a result, he lost his life. Not only was his water jar stolen, but he was also stabbed several times and died. The two chiefs of Yanjiao didn't hide this matter. They just wanted to warn the wanderers not to go out and stay at home. If they didn't want to, they could leave. Because of what happened between the invaders and the wanderers, the people in the tribe who were disloyal temporarily stopped thinking about it. Whether it was the wanderers or the warriors in Yanjiao, they all behaved themselves. When the hunting team went into the forest to hunt, they also saw some human skeletons. They were all people who entered the forest from other places. Unfortunately, they didn't make it out alive. Maybe there were people who succeeded in getting food and water, but the hunting team didn't meet them. Days passed, and the weather was still hot. Whether it was people or beasts, they were all dispirited by the heat. Xiao Xian made a pair of copper scissors. It was only used to cut hair and fur of ferocious beasts, so it was only cast in the ordinary way. Compared to a knife, scissors were much more convenient to cut hair and fur. Because the weather was too hot, sweat stuck to their messy hair and mixed with the dust, forming clumps. Many warriors were too lazy to take care of their hair. They simply tied their hair with straw ropes and put on a hat made of leaves before they went out to carry out the mission. Because of the lack of water, even if they could find water in the ferocious beasts' forest, they couldn't bathe every day. Therefore, day by day, their hair was knotted and difficult to comb. It was like they had returned to the beginning. They gradually let go of the habit of combing their hair. The scissors made by Xiao Xian helped them a lot. They came one by one to borrow the scissors to cut their hair. At this time, there was no concept of our bodies, hair, and skin were given to us by our parents. We didn't dare to damage them. It was the beginning of filial piety. They just cut their hair according to their own preferences. Usually, they wouldn't be willing to cut all their hair. After all, they had to wear animal teeth and bone ornaments in their hair to show off. But now they were too hot and couldn't take a shower, so cutting all their hair would save them a lot of trouble. Therefore, there were many more hairy bald men in the tribe. In addition to the warriors of the tribe, Xiao Xian cut some hair for Caesar and the other beasts that had thick hair. However, it was difficult to cut the hair of ferocious beasts with ordinary scissors. After several attempts, Xiao Xian gave up and lent the scissors to the people who looked after the animal pens. There were some animals with thick hair. They should have been slaughtered in the cold winter to keep their fur. Looking at the thick hair on their bodies, they looked unbearably hot. No wonder those animals were half dead every day. Even if they were given water, it didn't have much effect. The hot weather slowly passed as people prayed and cursed. When two thin crescent moons appeared in the dark night sky, the entire Yanjiao tribe, no, it should be said that almost all the tribes, people, and beasts on this land breathed a sigh of relief. Some even cried tears of joy. The appearance of the two crescent moons meant that according to the time, winter had passed. This kind of winter, for the people on this land, was simply suffering every minute and every second. They had never experienced winter like this before. After the end of winter, did it mean that this kind of weather would completely leave them and everything would return to normal? Everyone was looking forward to it. After the appearance of the two moons, on the second day of Yanjiao's sacrificial ceremony, the temperature began to drop. The wind became stronger and stronger. The coolness of the wind made the people who had experienced the torment of winter cheer to their heart's content. In the forest, all kinds of ferocious beasts also roared, welcoming the change. But was the nightmare really over? Chapter 567. After the strong wind, big raindrops fell. Yangguang, which had been in the sky for a whole winter, was finally covered by thick clouds. For many people on the land, they had never felt so close to the clouds. The raindrops fell quickly, and soon it was like a torrential downpour. The thirsty earth greedily absorbed the rainwater, and the smell of mud floated everywhere. The wanderers excitedly carried the terracotta tanks out to collect water. In the past winter, they used their labor to exchange for food and water from the Yanjiao. They didn't get much, and some people complained. But when they learned about the situation outside, no one complained anymore. They were afraid of being driven away. Although they didn't get much water, at least it was enough to support them until now. The heavy rain seemed to have extinguished the fire in the fearsome beast forest. The fierce beasts that had been irritable for a whole winter were appeased. From their carefree roars, one could guess their mood. The people in the tribe each had their own responsibilities. Some were on guard duty, some were taking care of the farmland, some were managing the animal pens, some were making pottery, and some were weaving. They were all ready to start work. Before, it was too hot, and they didn't even want to move, so the work at hand was naturally put on hold. Now they could finally start again. The withered seedlings in the field were also energetic, and the leaves in the forest looked a lot greener. Although the extreme weather had passed, the guards and defenses were not lowered. The two leaders took turns to go out and supervise every day. Even in the stormy weather, they did not let up. Everything be careful. This was what the two shamans said after the sacrifice. Although the two of them didn't know what would happen, they had a strong sense of crisis. It didn't matter which tribe it was against, it was just an indescribable sense of danger. If the two shamans had different opinions, there might be a dispute. But both shamans said the same thing. For the Yanjiao people, this meant that something was going to happen. They couldn't be careless. On a sunny day after the rain, the hunting team set out to hunt in the mountains. Xiao Xian followed the team into the forest. The green-faced fanged beasts had already been fed with blood, so naturally, there was someone to take care of them. He didn't need to keep an eye on them. Entering the forest once again, the group discovered that many trees in the forest had turned black. It was the appearance of a withered tree. Some of the lifeless trees had already been bitten full of holes by insects. If they were chopped down, a large number of small insects would gush out. Carrying the prey, Xiao Xian and the rest of the team arrived at the cave where they were resting. I remember that there used to be a stream here. Xiao Xian pointed to a spot on the mountain and said, "Indeed, but I don't see it now." "Perhaps there will be no more water after the winter dries up," I said. He was not very familiar with the various reasons for the formation of streams. He only knew that even if the water in the streams dried up in autumn and winter, it would flow again in spring when the snow melted or a large amount of rain fell. But now the stream in front of the mountain was gone, and he could not explain why. If it's gone, then so be it. As he spoke, I carried the prey into the cave. The others looked around and didn't see anything, so they followed him into the cave. Only Xiao Xian stood outside, looking at the original location of the stream. "I'll go take a look at the other place," Xiao Xian said to the rest in the cave. Out of curiosity, Mai and the other warriors followed Xiao Xian. They wanted to see what Xiao Xian had found. Xiao Xian remembered that there was a river nearby. It wasn't very big, but there were often some river beasts ambushing in it. The stream had stopped flowing. Maybe it was because there was no snow on the mountain this year. The unusually hot winter had caused the snow that covered the mountain top all year round to disappear. However, the river over there was not only water from the melted snow flowing into the stream, but also underground water. It rained so heavily a few days ago. Even if the stream couldn't form, the rainwater that flowed into the river and the water that seeped into the rocks and soil of the mountain should have risen a lot, right? It had rained quite heavily a few days ago. However, when Xiao Xian went over, he found that there were only a few small fish swimming lazily in the river. He didn't see any slightly bigger river beasts. The reason was that the river level was too low. The river was too shallow. Some river beasts didn't like diving areas like this, so naturally, they didn't appear here. Mai and the others were surprised to see such a low river level, but only for a moment. They thought that it might be because the mountain forest was too thirsty. After the rain, the mountain forest drank most of the rainwater, so there wasn't much rainwater left for the river. However, even if the mountain forest could absorb and store a lot of rainwater, what about the underground water? A rainstorm that lasted for a few days couldn't even make the river level rise? Even if the rise wasn't obvious, it shouldn't be so small. In the past, the river water here was often muddy yellow because the river beasts in the river liked to stir up the mud and sand at the bottom of the river. But now, the river water was not only shallow, but also much clearer. This meant that no river beasts had come here recently. Let's go to the next place. I remember that there is a karst cave here. When Xiao Xian hunted with the hunting team in the past, he once found a karst cave. There was a pool in the cave, but the water was red, and there were some tiny creatures swimming in it. Even if the water was filtered and boiled, it was still not drinkable. Later, Xiao Xian didn't go there again. As soon as he stepped into the karst cave, Xiao Xian's expression changed. Not only Xiao Xian, but the other warriors who were more sensitive also felt that something was wrong. In the past, when they came here, they could feel the cool and moist water vapor in the wind as soon as they entered the cave. There was also a faint sweet smell from the plants that grew in the cave. But now, neither the water vapor nor the smell of the plants could be smelled. Xiao Xian walked in. In the past, he could see a layer of shallow water on the ground after a few steps. Now, after walking for more than 10 meters, the ground and the surrounding stone walls were still dry. Mai held the water moon stone and lit up the surrounding area. No water. Still no water. The deeper they went, the lower the terrain was, until there were only some small underground caves left. There is no water in this cave. The Yanjiao warriors, who had just experienced a strange winter, suddenly felt that their throats were dry. How could there be no water? At this time, they understood Xiao Xian's purpose, and everyone became alert. They thought that the crisis had passed, but they didn't expect that it was still there. Looking at the ground carefully, there were some dried red things on the uneven ground of the cave. Some of them could be scraped off with a knife. Mai picked up a ball of red debris scraped off the ground and crushed it with his fingers. The debris quickly turned into powder. These are the creatures that used to live in this pool. Now they're all dead. Xiao Xian frowned and walked out. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Mai and the others felt that their throats were even drier. Without water, would they die of thirst? After that, during the next few days of hunting, Xiao Xian went to find several more water sources. The weather looked normal, but the water level of many water sources was still falling, especially those that came from underground water. Almost none of them looked the same as before. Most of them had dried up, and those that didn't were on the verge of drying up. It was only a matter of time before they completely dried up. At the same time, in the Lu tribe, they thought that the dark period was over, but they didn't expect that the days were not so good. The water level of the pool that their tribe had always occupied had fallen even lower. It didn't rise because of the previous rainstorm. They could clearly see that the surrounding rainwater was pouring in, but the water level in the pool was still falling. Why? Chapter 568. After the hunting team returned, Xiao Xian told the shaman and chief about what he had seen. He also reminded everyone to prepare in advance. Now everything seemed normal. The weather was in line with the characteristics of this season. It was neither hotter nor colder. It seemed to have returned to normal. However, not only the Flaming Horns tribe, but also many other tribes on the continent, after experiencing an unusually difficult winter, the lack of water was very nerve-wracking. On this mainland, there were many streams, ponds, and small and medium-sized lakes formed from underground water. When the winter ended and the rain came, the weather returned to normal. However, these water sources did not seem to have recovered. Instead, the situation became more serious. There were not many water sources left. Because of this, the competition for resources broke out again. Spring was in full bloom. It was supposed to be full of life. However, on this mainland, there was an indescribable panic. Dried brown blood splattered on the grass by the river. The rancid smell with a residual murderous aura told passers-by what had happened here. As he listened to the news brought back by the expedition team, Xiao Xian and the other leaders of the Flaming Horn tribe remained silent. After a while, the shaman finally spoke. Everything is a sign. We need to prepare in advance. The shaman sighed and walked slowly to the window. He looked up at the blue sky and fluttering clouds outside. We even need to be prepared to face something similar to what our ancestors encountered 1,000 years ago. The shaman's words shocked everyone in the room. They could no longer sit still. They all jumped up as if they had been pricked. What? Shaman, what do you mean? Do you really think that what's about to happen will be the same as what our ancestors encountered? No matter if it was the leader or the leader, none of them could remain calm. All the preparations they had made were based on the hardships they had experienced in the past winter, but they did not think further. But from the shaman's words, could it be the same as what their ancestors had encountered 1,000 years ago? Didn't that mean it would be devastating? Zheng Luo and Duo Kong looked at the old shaman who was sighing in front of the window. They then turned to the old lady who was sitting there silently. What do you mean? The old lady looked up and glanced at Zheng Luo and Duo Kong helplessly. They had known each other for a long time. One look from the old lady was enough for Zheng Luo and Duo Kong to guess what she meant. At this time, the old lady's reaction was obviously a tacit agreement with the old shaman's words. In other words, she had the same idea. Shock, fear, panic. All the emotions ran through their minds. All that was left was a blank. They were familiar with history. Although they did not experience the natural disaster 1,000 years ago, they could still understand a little bit from the handwritten notes left behind by their ancestors. Even their powerful ancestors could not avoid it, so what could they do? 1,000 years ago, a natural disaster knocked the Flaming Horn tribe off their glorious throne. What followed was a clash of different ideologies, causing the tribe to split into two. The once glorious Flaming Horn tribe fell into the dust and faded out of sight. That was the power of heaven and earth. Even the ancestors could not resist it. So how could they? So what if they knew in advance? Could it be that their ancestors could not foresee it? Even if they could not foresee the specific things, they could at least have a hunch, right? But the result was still the same. Yanjiao people might fight for other things, but if it was the same natural disaster 1,000 years ago, they were afraid. What should we do? Ao clenched his fists and trembled slightly. What should they do? That was what everyone wanted to know. Once again, the room fell into a silence that resembled the silent night. The surroundings were filled with a low pressure that made people feel cold. Even when the warm wind from outside the window blew in, it did not improve the atmosphere that had dropped to the freezing point. Everyone's thoughts were scattered in all directions. The more they thought, the more shocked they were. The more they thought, the more they felt like their bodies were frozen. Less than 4 years after coming to the old haunt, they thought they could have a new beginning. But now that they heard the news, it was like everyone's hope had been destroyed. Human power could stop it, but the power of the heavens was unstoppable. That was what every tribesman thought. After an unknown amount of time, the people in the room began to look at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian, who was deep in thought, finally reacted. He raised his head and saw that everyone in the room was staring at him. What? Xiao Xian was confused. Can you do divination? Asked Zheng Luo. Everyone in the room knew that Xiao Xian could use not divination. I've tried a few times before, but I didn't succeed once. Xiao Xian shook his head. The eyes of the others in the room darkened as disappointment filled their faces. They originally thought that Xiao Xian might be able to use divination to find out what the shamaness didn't know. Now it seemed that this method wouldn't work. Duo Kong scratched his stiff short hair. Then can we borrow the power of the ancestors? The power of the ancestors? Everyone was confused at first, then looked at Xiao Xian expectantly with sparkling eyes. Yes, the power of the ancestors. Didn't the people from the other side rely on the power of the ancestors to cross the sea? It was said that not everyone could use such powerful ancestral power. Even the ancestors from 1,000 years ago could not get as much power from the bone ornaments as Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian took out the bone ornament necklace he always wore. He took a deep breath and sighed. The ancestral bone ornaments might not work. We use too much power to cross the sea. The bone ornaments haven't recovered yet. Even if we can use them, they might not be able to help us much. Right now, the 6 bone ornaments on the necklace were a little brighter than when they had just crossed the sea. However, it was still incomparable to before. It was like an exhausted person who had not had enough time to rest, and his strength had yet to fully recover. If they used them again, not only would they not be able to reach their peak power, they might lose more than they gained. They couldn't put all their hopes on the bone ornaments. They had to think of another way. We can't do this, we can't do that. What can we do? Can we leave the old haunt? Duo Kong muttered. As soon as Duo Kong finished speaking, he was glared at by everyone in the room. How could he say that? This was the old haunt. How could they leave so easily? But the situation now was indeed different from 1,000 years ago. There was no fire seed in the old haunt now. Even if the entire tribe moved to another place, theoretically speaking, it was still possible. No one wanted to leave. Even if there was no fire seed, they still had a sense of belonging. But wasn't this a special situation? The tribe could leave first, find a place to hide, and wait for the disaster to pass before returning. Thinking about it this way, it seemed possible. Chapter 569. It was not impossible for them to leave to hide from the disaster, but no one wanted to do so unless it was absolutely necessary. If they were really forced to leave, just how great would the changes in the world be? It was unimaginable. Moreover, in the past 3 years, the construction of the houses and the planting of the fields were already on track. It was a good time for rapid development, but now they had to leave. They could only say that they were unlucky. Life was full of obstacles. No matter what would happen in the future, it had not happened yet. This gave everyone a chance to prepare. They could not wait until the disaster happened. They had to plan ahead. The person in charge of the fields came over to ask Xiao Xian about the planting of the 1,000-grain gold. Last year, they did not know what the weather would be like, so they tried to plant some other seeds. The 1,000-grain gold could not be planted carelessly. It was even more precious than Jiju's seeds. That was why they did not plant any 1,000-grain gold last year. Now that the weather was back to normal, the person in charge of the fields was thinking about planting some new seeds. After a discussion, Chi and the rest came over to ask Xiao Xian. After all, the decision on the 1,000-grain gold lay with Xiao Xian. No, don't be in a hurry to plant the seeds, Xiao Xian continued, seeing Chi's confusion. Not just the 1,000-grain gold. Don't plant anything else for now. As for the crops in the fields, if there are any ripe ones, keep them first, especially the grains we planted last year. Some of the crops in the fields were already ripe. According to the original plan, after the harvest, they would distribute the crops according to their work. But this time, in order to prevent the disaster, they had to change the plan. Meat could not be preserved for long, but grains and other crops could be preserved for a long time. If they could not find any prey by then, there was still food in the storehouse to solve the problem. Although they did not understand Xiao Xian's reason, since Xiao Xian had said so, Chi would do as he said. But if we do that, there will be a lot of empty space in the fields, Chi said. Chi said, in the past winter, the empty fields weren't left there all the time. The people in charge of taking care of the fields had used various planting techniques to fertilize the fields and wait for the seeds to be planted. But now, Xiao Xian actually asked them to stop planting. It wasn't that they had any complaints, they just felt that it was a pity. When Xiao Xian said that he would not plant anything for the time being, he did not mean that he would not plant anything. It was just that he would temporarily stop sowing those plants that had a long growth cycle. However, he could plant some plants that had a short growth cycle. The time between planting and harvesting was relatively short. Perhaps they would have matured before the disaster struck. At the very least, they would still be able to harvest some. Chi realized something from Xiao Xian's words. He nodded and left with a serious expression. Although Xiao Xian didn't say what would happen, the shaman had told everyone during this year's ceremony that they needed to be extra careful this year. Everything was for the sake of Yanjiao. There was nothing wrong with trusting their decision. Chi went to tell the other people in charge of the fields about Xiao Xian's intentions. Other than Yanjiao, some people in other parts of the continent also had a premonition of what was going to happen. For example, the Mang tribe and the other large tribes. The shaman wasn't an idiot either. He had a premonition before, but it wasn't strong at the time. Now, perhaps because the disaster was approaching, his premonition grew stronger. Every tribe was making preparations. Far away from the fearsome beast forest, far away from the large tribes, at the border of the continent, near the boundless river. The drumming tribe's trading team had just returned from trading with the Pu tribe. On the way back, they carried bamboo baskets filled with all sorts of utensils and stood on the backs of large crocodiles. The crocodiles in the river swayed their powerful tails. Only part of their bodies was above the water surface. They looked around with cold, emotionless eyes. In the past winter, the tribes in other parts of the continent had encountered quite a bit of trouble. Some people even died of thirst. However, to the tribes living near the river, even though the heat was torturous, they could still withstand it. At least they didn't have to worry about water. The river they were in now was almost dry during the winter. At higher elevations, they could see the bottom. The mud at the bottom of the river was hard from the sun, so the crocodiles all ran into the river. Because of the crocodiles' help, the drumming tribesmen didn't get attacked by the other dangerous beasts in the river when they went to get water. Under such high temperatures, not only were the people easily agitated, even the fish in the river were full of murderous intent. After winter, a few days of heavy rain caused these small rivers to rise again. However, it was only for a few days. During this period of time, the river had obviously dropped. When the crocodiles swam in the water, their mood was much worse. "Will the river dry up again?" asked a warrior from the drumming tribe. "Who knows? But even if it dries up, we still have the river next to us. There's plenty of water there. Anyway, we won't die of thirst." Another warrior, standing on the back of a crocodile, said indifferently. People in the inland areas were seriously short of water, but they weren't. They didn't worry about the life and death of others. They only cared about their own tribesmen. The closer they got to the drumming tribe, the more strange the warriors became. "Why do I feel like there are a lot more fish today? I saw them too. I thought they were here to welcome us, but looking at them, it's more like what?" The warrior didn't continue, only frowning. The others had the same expression. They were familiar with the crocodiles. The tribe's totem was the crocodile. They could see the emotions of the crocodiles. In the past, there weren't as many crocodiles swimming in the river as there were now. However, along the way, they found that the number of crocodiles in the river was more than 3 times more than before. Twice as many crocodiles was already abnormal. They would look for the reason. Now, there were more than 3 times more crocodiles. This situation made them panic. Just as the warrior said, the crocodiles didn't look like they were here to welcome them. It was more like they were hiding from something. Even if the crocodiles didn't panic, such a situation made the drumming tribe explode. The shaman spent the night looking for the reason. His ability wasn't as strong as the shamans of other big tribes. He had a premonition that something bad was going on, but he couldn't compare to those big tribes. Therefore, he wanted to find some solutions and try to find out the specific reason for the crocodile's behavior. Day after day, the people of the drumming tribe still couldn't find the reason. However, more and more crocodiles came ashore, swam into the river, and lurked in the ponds of the drumming tribe. On the contrary, there were fewer crocodiles in the river. Without the crocodiles, there were more dangerous fish and river beasts in the river. For a time, the people of the drumming tribe didn't dare to go into the river. They only dared to go to the rivers with more crocodiles. One day, the warriors of the drumming tribe who were patrolling on the river bank heard a gurgling sound. They thought it was a river beast in the water and immediately became alert. However, they stared at the river for a long time and only saw some bubbles coming out of the river. There were no river beasts. The fishes with sharp teeth in the river jumped out of the water from time to time. When they fell into the water, they jumped around restlessly. Chapter 570. The changes in the boundless river made the people of the drumming tribe worried. The changes in the river lasted for a few days, but they didn't see any big movements. It was like seeing someone throw a huge stone at them, but they didn't see the stone fall. The shaman and chief of the drumming tribe couldn't sleep for several nights. Since the changes on the other side of the river, the crocodiles in the river collectively moved their nests away from the river bank. Now their range of activity was also far away from the river bank. Even if they had to climb a long distance into the water every day, they were willing to do so. This made the people of the drumming tribe even more puzzled and worried. What on earth made the crocodiles behave like this? Until one seemingly peaceful day, the ground suddenly shook. The crocodiles that were swimming in the water panicked and climbed ashore from the river. They continued to run away from the river bank towards their new cave. The man standing on the crocodile's back was overturned. No matter how he shouted, the crocodiles didn't look back and kept climbing towards their new cave. After the earthquake, there was no more movement. When the warriors of the drumming tribe checked around, they found that there were many dead fish in the river. A few days ago, the fish that were fiercely jumping on the river and biting each other with their big mouths were now floating on the water with their bellies turned up, motionless. This. What's going on? The patrolling warriors hurried back to report this to the shaman and chief. In the following days, there would be an earthquake every 10 days or so. Moreover, the interval between each earthquake was getting shorter and shorter, and it was getting more and more intense. The people of the drumming tribe followed the instructions of the shaman and the chief. They learned from the crocodiles and moved all their houses away from the river bank. At that time, the water in many places on the mainland had dried up. The good thing was that the weather didn't change much. It was still the same as in previous years. However, every time it rained, the people of the tribe and the wanderers who depended on the tribes would rush to bring out the prepared pots to collect water. The tribes that were good at making pottery made a lot of money in such a strange living environment. In the past, large pottery was not easy to sell. Now, the best sellers were the terracotta jars and large pots. Making pottery was easy, but making good pottery was not easy. Many people's pottery wasn't of good quality. It was easy to break, and water would seep out of the walls of the jar. Some of them couldn't be used for long and weren't strong enough. They could only buy pottery from the trading places. It was the same in Yanjiao. The tourists would also request to use their labor in exchange for pots and jars. After the shower ended, the people inside and outside the tribe were all busy. They put the pottery that was placed outside to catch water into the house. Now, because of the special situation, if the shamaness felt that it was going to rain, she would inform the people in the tribe in advance. Then, when they saw the change in the sky, everyone would hurriedly move out the tools they used to collect water, filling up the outside. In the end, there was not much space for people to walk outside. However, when it was raining, not many people were outside. Everyone was busy fetching water. The shaking of the ground was not only felt at the edge of the mainland, but also felt in other places. Especially in the forest where Yanjiao was located, it was especially intense. Every time the ground shook, there would be chaos in the forest. Beasts would roar and birds would fly in disorder. What shocked Xiao Xian the most was that when he went out to hunt, he saw a volcano in the forest. The volcano had not erupted for a long time. There was a pool in the depression at the top of the mountain. Xiao Xian had been there with the hunting team. It seemed that the volcano hadn't erupted for thousands of years. There were many plants and animals living there. Xiao Xian didn't pay much attention to it at that time. But this time, when he went out with the hunting team, carrying the prey to the cave where they rested, Xiao Xian saw the towering mountain that was thousands of meters above the ground. It looked the same as before, but it gave Xiao Xian a strange feeling. Xiao Xian also asked the others in the hunting team. When they saw the volcano, they didn't feel anything special. Only Xiao Xian felt more and more frightened. He always felt that there was a ferocious monster hidden under the tranquility. It might not be that there was a giant beast living there. Xiao Xian just felt a wave of panic when he saw the volcano. It was his first instinct. There must be a reason for it. Then, the successive earthquakes made Xiao Xian have a guess. If that guess was true, taking a deep breath, Xiao Xian called the people who were in charge of the farmland and asked about the situation in the field. Some of the newly planted crops with short growing periods were close to maturity. They were just side dishes that the warriors didn't like. The non-totemic warriors in the tribe liked them because they were good for their health. When the land was empty, the people who were in charge of the farmland chose to plant these seeds. The harvested grains and some food that could be stored for a long time were all processed and stored in the warehouse. Weapons were being forged all the time. Everyone had been making preparations for the uneasiness in their hearts. Just as the earthquakes happened again and again, the rainy season came. According to the situation in the past, the rainy season here was not as obvious as the rainy season on the river bank. It just rained more often. But this year, the rain was not only frequent, but also fierce. Everyone no longer took out the containers to hold the water. But this still couldn't reduce the panic in their hearts. Boom, the ground shook again. Many of the pots placed there to hold the water were overturned, and some even broke. Some people almost lost their balance. All kinds of utensils clanged against each other, and many children cried in the houses. This was already a very good situation. After all, the ground shook many times, and everyone was mentally prepared. They were not as panicked as they were at the beginning. It had only been 5 days since the last earthquake. The time interval was even shorter. Splash! The rain fell more rapidly. If it was in the past, many people living near the rivers would be worried that such a fierce rainstorm would cause the river to overflow and flood their farmland. But now, no one thought about the overflow of the river, because the water level was still relatively low. The Lu tribe. The chief of the Lu tribe stood in front of the pool occupied by their tribe with a wooden face. This place had become a bottomless pit. Since the end of winter, the pool had not produced any water. Even now, when the rain was unusually frequent, there was no sign of water coming out of the pool. This rainy season was unusual. Many people had never experienced it before. The rainfall was heavy and turbulent, but the river still didn't rise. The people of the drumming tribe who lived on the edge of the continent felt it even more strongly. The patrolling warriors stood on the bank of the big river, looking into the distance. Those huge figures of the river beasts jumped out of the water, making a long roar. They had lived here for so long. Every year at this time, they would hear the river overlords roaring and leading the river teams away. But this was the first time they heard the river overlords not roaring like in previous years. This time, the roar was sharper and more urgent, making people more flustered. Moreover, according to the annual pattern, the various river beasts in the river would leave during the rainy season. However, the situation of the river beasts leaving this year had happened long before the rainy season had even arrived. This year's rainy season, the river beasts left very early. This year's rainy season, the crocodiles of the tribe did not leave, but they rarely appeared. The situation of going into the river was even rarer. Most of the time, they stayed far away from the river bank. This year's rainy season, the water level of the boundless river began to fall in advance. Before the rainy season ended, the fall was obvious. No matter how heavy the rain was, it couldn't save the falling river. What do you think will happen? A warrior of the drumming tribe was drenched in the rain, wiping his face and asking. After he asked, he didn't hear the response of the others in the team. When he looked to the side, the warriors were all staring at the river, as if their eyes were going to pop out. Their faces were ashen, as if they had seen something extremely terrifying. What are you looking at? Look at how scared you are. Before he finished his sentence, the warrior also saw the situation on the river. In fact, they didn't see it clearly. After all, it was far away, and there was a thick curtain of rain obstructing their vision. They could only see a blurry shadow. But it was this blurry shadow that scared the patrolling warriors so much that they almost suffocated. In the river that had fallen a lot, on the surface of the water in the distance, there was a river beast that had appeared. The river overlord that used to give people an unparalleled sense of oppression suddenly exploded. Yes, it exploded directly. It was like a piece of soft mud that was squeezed hard by someone. In the distance, there was a bloody scene. The cry of the river beast stopped abruptly, and no other river beasts appeared. Everything on the river seemed to have suddenly quieted down. Perhaps there would be some sound at the point of the incident, but the river bank was far away, and there was the noise of the rain falling constantly, so the warriors of the drumming tribe couldn't hear anything else. In the distance, the river seemed to be shrouded in a bloody mist, and they couldn't see anything else. The rapid rain fell on people, fell into their eyes, and flowed through the narrow pupils of the people of the drumming tribe. They could bear the water entering their eyes, but the sudden rain fell too quickly, and it caused a little discomfort in their eyes. But at this time, that discomfort couldn't affect the mood of the warriors at all. After a little silence, the warriors of the drumming tribe reacted, and they all took a deep breath of the cold water vapor. The rain poured into the trachea from the nasal cavity, and several warriors were choked, coughing as if their lungs were going to be coughed out. In fact, the choking of the rain wasn't serious, but they had just recovered from the shock, and just wanted to do something to vent their fear. On the river, that was the overlord of the river. Everyone was extremely afraid of it, and admitted that it was the overlord of the river. However, the huge overlord of the river turned into a bloody mist in an instant. What kind of power was that? Chapter 571. Above the river, the bloody mist in the distance became thinner and thinner as the surface of the river fell. Finally, it disappeared. In the end, the people of the drumming tribe didn't know what happened on the river. After they saw what happened on the river, the whole tribe once again moved away from the river bank, further away from the river bank. Although they didn't get close to the river, the people of the drumming tribe could guess the situation on the other side from the movements of the nearby rivers. Before they moved back, the water in the big river had already started to fall. Some of the small rivers that connected to the big river had also started to change. It was similar to what happened after the end of the rainy season in previous years. However, this time, all the changes were brought forward. Moreover, the water level in those small rivers was also unprecedentedly low. The rain continued, and it lasted longer than in previous years. The water level in the nearby rivers didn't rise. The crocodiles of the drumming tribe all seemed to be frightened. They always hid in their nests and didn't leave. At most, they would go into the river to fish or hunt other prey. Some of the more irritable crocodiles would even fight. The crocodiles were anxious and worried, and so were the people of the drumming tribe. It wasn't just them. On this continent, people from other places, and within each tribe, were all filled with a sense of panic. Especially the shamans of the few large tribes, they always felt very anxious, as if a beast that had been lurking for a long time was about to bare its fangs. However, where this beast was, what it looked like, and what kind of threat it would pose, they had no idea. Fearsome Beast Forest, Yanjiao Tribe. In the house, Old Ku's stone crafting sound had no rhythm. This wasn't Old Ku's usual style, but at this time, Old Ku was already absent-minded. His eyes weren't on the stone he was crafting. He was staring at a certain spot, but there was no focus. Xiao Xian looked at the sky, which was still raining, and didn't say a word. Suddenly, the sky seemed to change its style. A dark scene replaced the rain falling from the sky. The sky seemed to be dyed with a mass of ink, and the ink was spreading quickly. Flashing lightning cut through the darkness and scattered everywhere. Xiao Xian couldn't help but take a deep breath as a huge pressure and panic suddenly assaulted him. Even his hair stood on end. However, when Xiao Xian quivered and looked again, the sky was still the same as before. Dark clouds covered the sky and rain poured down hastily. Where did the lightning and ink come from? No, that's not right. Xiao Xian paced around the room. This feeling was too familiar. It was not every time he would get a revelation from the dream. He would also see some situations that others could not see. It happened a long time ago, but this kind of situation did not appear often. Xiao Xian's sudden impatience snapped Old Ku out of his daze. Stopping what he was doing, Old Ku walked to the door of the stoneware workshop with his cane. He looked over at Xiao Xian and asked, "What's wrong?" Xiao Xian's violently beating heart still hadn't calmed down. When he heard Old Ku's question, he didn't explain much. Instead, he said, "I'm going to the shaman." After taking 2 steps, he turned back to Old Ku and said, "You can make a hat. A hard one with a wide brim." After saying that, Xiao Xian hurriedly ran into the rain, leaving Old Ku standing there with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand why Xiao Xian wanted to make that kind of thing. The hat that Xiao Xian mentioned was made by Xiao Xian last year when they were farming. It was for the people who took care of the field to use it to hide Yangguang. Later, everyone weaved that kind of straw hat with rattan grass and remembered the style. Naturally, Old Ku was familiar with it. However, Xiao Xian just said that it had to be hard. If it was hard, they couldn't use normal rattan grass. Although he didn't understand why Xiao Xian said that, Old Ku still followed Xiao Xian's instructions and thought about what material to use. On the other side, Xiao Xian hurriedly ran to the shamans. When he arrived, the 2 shamans were discussing something. Seeing that Xiao Xian was in such a hurry, they stopped talking and asked, "What happened?" If it was just a normal matter, Xiao Xian wouldn't be in such a hurry. Xiao Xian nodded and told the 2 shamans what he saw just now. Hearing this, the 2 shamans were shocked and the worry in their eyes grew. "What do you think that is?" The 2 shamans didn't know what that situation was, but Xiao Xian had a guess. He took a deep breath and tried to speak calmly and clearly. "I think that the volcano in the forest is about to erupt." "What?" The 2 old shamans were shocked and stood up from the animal skin cushions. The last time Xiao Xian went out with the hunting team and saw the volcano, he told the shamans about it when he came back. However, at that time, there were no signs and no one could be sure what would happen. But now, Xiao Xian felt that there was more than a 60% chance that what he said was true. The 2 shamans didn't know what kind of effect a volcano eruption would have, but they had learned about it from the records left behind by their ancestors. "Is it really coming?" The old shaman's voice trembled. His eyes were tightly shut, and his loose eyelids trembled. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes and called in the 2 soldiers who were guarding outside. His tone was resolute, and he emphasized almost every word. "Immediately inform the people above the leader to come here." Perhaps there were some old warriors who didn't want to leave, but at this time, the shaman showed his tough side again. In order for this operation to be carried out, the leaders must be informed. As long as the leaders could take the lead, the warriors under them would definitely not have any other ideas. In the past few years, some of the people in the tribe had become bolder. People's hearts were fickle, and not all of them were on the same side. Usually, the shaman could pretend that he didn't know, but at this time, he wouldn't allow anyone to have any objections. The 2 shamans had the same idea. It wasn't that they were bossy and arbitrary, but they were afraid. The natural disaster that Xiao Xian mentioned was actually not the most important thing to them. What they were most worried about was whether the tribe would split again. If there was a difference in beliefs, Would they encounter the same thing that happened to their ancestors 1,000 years ago? After all, this time, the situation might be similar to the disaster 1,000 years ago. Not long after, the 3 team leaders and 20 team leaders, after being informed, didn't dare to delay and ran over in the rain. The shaman briefly repeated Xiao Xian's words, then said, "What I mean is, our tribe should be prepared to leave." Although they were already mentally prepared, when they heard this decision, they still couldn't bear to leave. "Then when will we leave?" Ao's voice was hoarse, and there was obvious fatigue on his face. There were dark circles around his eyes, and he hadn't slept well these days. In response to this question, the 2 shamans looked at each other, then at Xiao Xian at the same time. Xiao Xian paused, then said, "We'll leave as soon as the rain stops. In the next few days, everyone should be prepared. If you lose everything, you can start over again, but if you lose your life, you lose everything." The rain continued for a few more days, until one day, it suddenly cleared up, and Yangguang was radiant. However, the Yanjiao tribesmen's mood wasn't as radiant as Yangguang's. They were already prepared to leave this place that they had devoted themselves to for more than 3 years. Chapter 572. The Yanjiao people were already feeling gloomy after leaving their homeland, which they had painstakingly rebuilt for 4 years. There were still unknown dangers and an uncertain future ahead of them. Everyone's emotions were very unstable. The meaning of the old haunt was different from other places. This was the root of the Flaming Horn tribe. However, without the fire seed, the meaning of the old haunt seemed to have changed a little. No matter what, the old haunt was different. Leaving this place, everyone's hearts were extremely complicated. Their footsteps were heavy. This was different from the last large-scale migration. Last time, they had embarked on the migration road with endless hope and longing, endless motivation, and a constant feeling of returning to their roots. But this time, they seemed to have felt the feelings of their ancestors 1,000 years ago. Although they were only leaving temporarily, would they really be able to return in the future? When they returned, would this place still be the same as before? The crops in the fields had all been harvested. The immature ones had been pulled out and brought away. The animals in the animal pens, except for some cubs, had all been slaughtered in advance to make jerky. In addition, the tribe had rushed out many carriages. There were oxen, horses, and other livestock to pull the carriages. There were also a few ferocious beasts in the tribe. They had pulled carriages before, so they were very experienced. This time there were many carriages. There were materials in the forest, as well as metal tools. Some parts of the beast carriages that were not suitable for use with stone tools could be replaced with metal tools. That way, the beast carriages could be made more sturdy. Therefore, compared to the last large-scale migration, there were many more people in the group this time. There were also many carriages. Among them, there were some beast carriages that were made to look like big boxes. No one was allowed to go near them. Except for a few people in the tribe, anyone who went near them would be severely punished. Inside the carriages were the veins of the sky that had been dug up again. The largest carriage was used as a temporary flower pot, and the 1,000-year-old veins of the sky had been transplanted there. If the weather was good, the guards would open the wooden boards above to let the plants bask in the sun. Fortunately, the veins of the sky were not as big as cabbages. Only the roots were a little damaged. After all, the longest part of the veins of the sky was its roots, which were like the pulse of a human. In the middle of the group, there were dozens of large carts filled with food, and there were also many guards around them. The people in the team did not bring much food. Most of the food was transported together. However, Yanjiao did not care about the wanderers. If they wanted to leave with the team, they could follow the team. If they did not want to follow, they could go wherever they wanted. Some of the tourists felt that Yanjiao was making a mountain out of a molehill and did not intend to leave. They even thought that after the Yanjiao left, they would go into the forest and live in the Yanjiao people's houses. They had been thinking about those solid stone houses for a long time. This time, the Yanjiao tribes were migrating, and no one could stop them. It was a good opportunity to occupy them. Maybe they could even live in the houses of the Yanjiao shamans and chiefs. He had to enjoy it. Some wanderers still decided to follow Yanjiao because they had learned their lesson from the previous changes. There weren't many people who left for other places. They were aware of the fact that they could either stay or leave with the Flaming Horns. If they didn't choose either option and went to other places, it would definitely be more difficult. They might not even have a chance to survive. The movement of more than 10,000 Yanjiao tribes was too obvious. It was impossible to avoid the eyes of others. In just 4 years, Yanjiao had migrated again. It was simply unbelievable. All the tribes who knew about this thought that Yanjiao was crazy. Did they think that migrating tribes was a game? How long had it been since the last migration? Why didn't they stop? Were they joking about the fire seed? Wait, where did they hide Yanjiao's fire seed? They did not seem to feel it. However, because the frequency of the earthquakes had increased and the battle for water had become more intense, many people only talked about it at the beginning. After that, they no longer paid attention to Yanjiao. Those who were fighting for water continued to do what they were supposed to do. Of course, there were also people who tried to figure out what Yanjiao's actions meant. Xiao Xian had already sent people to inform the Lu tribe. The Hui tribe was too far away, so Gigu sent his snow falcon to inform them. After all, they were cooperating with the Lu tribe. They should be informed of the migration and be careful. The horses that pulled the carriages were domesticated by the Hui tribe. They were more reliable than those bought from other tribes. They were calmer in the face of danger. There were a lot of blind robbers on the road, but they were all mercilessly chopped down. There were even robbing gangs that were formed by people from the same tribe. Because they couldn't compete with other tribes and couldn't seize the water source, they changed their way of survival. Robbing. When robbing in a gang, the more people there were, the better. With a plan and premeditation, the success rate was much higher. After tasting the benefits, they became more ambitious and gradually shifted their target to larger groups. This time, Yanjiao was targeted by them. It was because Yanjiao's carriages filled with food were too attractive. They could smell the smell even if they covered it with cloth. They did not want to give it up. And when it came to robbers, the Yanjiao people never held back. They killed whoever came. This year's rainy season lasted for a long time. After the rainy season ended, the time for the 2 moons to coincide was approaching. Until that day finally arrived. The 2 moons were full, illuminating the night as bright as day. Ever since they came here, the Yanjiao people had not experienced the fear of the 2 moons for a long time. Once again, it shrouded their hearts. Xiao Xian felt his eyelids twitch. A strong sense of uneasiness rose in his heart. Cold sweat inexplicably broke out, as if a basin of water had been poured over him. His bones felt like they were frozen. It was extremely cold. Xiao Xian, what's wrong? Zheng Luo asked. It was not that he was suspicious, but Xiao Xian did not look right. They're here. Xiao Xian said these 2 words almost without thinking, as if it was an unconscious reaction. Zheng Luo wanted to ask more, but the originally resting fearsome beasts suddenly stood up in fright. Then, the cows and horses pulling the carriages and other animals also became anxious. Boom! The earth rumbled without warning. The ground beneath their feet shook violently. Those who were asleep were jolted awake. Many people lost their balance and fell to the ground. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of the earth splitting open tore apart the peace in everyone's hearts. People were trembling uncontrollably due to extreme fear. Even though they had been warned of what they might encounter, even though they had been mentally preparing themselves, even though they had experienced earthquakes many times, this moment was something that they had never encountered before. Under the white night sky, between the cracks in the earth, a vast and terrifying aura rushed out. It was so powerful that no one could think of resisting. That wasn't something that any beast could do. Not even the beast kings that people thought to be unstoppable could have such destructive power. This was the power of heaven and earth. This time, it was not like the previous earthquakes that were just for fun. Then, there was a violent rumble that almost made everyone lose their hearing. The people in the group stared blankly at the place they had walked before resting. There, a rock wall with no end in sight rose from the ground. It was as if a pair of hands had broken off the earth. The ground shook violently, dispersing everyone's thoughts. At that moment, their minds were blank. Any kind of power could only be truly experienced after experiencing it personally. In the past, they could not understand why their powerful ancestors were forced to leave their homeland. Now they felt it, and this was just the beginning. The night was as bright as day. Everyone was anxious. Chapter 573. When the night gradually faded away and the 2 moons were finally replaced by the sun, the earthquake was still not over. Ferocious Beast Mountain Forest. The chaos had already begun before the earthquake. The ferocious beasts who had a bad premonition took action first. Even if they were mortal enemies who fought for territory on normal days, now that they met in the forest, they would not look at each other. They were running for their lives. Perhaps because their level of evolution was higher than the other ferocious beasts in the forest, they could feel the approaching threat more clearly. They had no other thoughts now. There was only one thought in their minds, and that was like an instinctive reaction from the bottom of their hearts. Run. Run to a place far away from danger. Therefore, many ferocious beasts fled in all directions. Because of their movements, the forest was also stirred up. Until the roar came, the whole ground began to shake. The forest seemed to have completely lost its balance and was in chaos. Fissures suddenly appeared in this mountain forest that was home to billions of creatures. Some of the beasts that couldn't escape in time fell directly into the fissures. They only had time to let out a cry of despair. The ferocious beasts who could not stop in time fell one after another. Those who managed to stop were also knocked down by the ferocious beasts behind them. They became the souls of the dead under the cracks. A ferocious beast used its powerful jumping ability to cross the cracks that had just appeared. However, it did not even have time to rejoice. In the next moment, a rock wall suddenly rose from the ground and appeared in front of it. The whole ground shook violently, constantly letting out deafening roars. No matter how majestic and ferocious the ferocious beasts were, at this moment, in front of such power, they could only tremble. The pool at the top of the volcano that Xiao Xian had seen before was long gone. Moreover, before Xiao Xian and the others left, there were warriors who went to check it out. In the depression, there were only some melted rocks. And now, when the sun rose with an earth-shattering bang, terrifying and violent volcanic ash and rocks shot high into the sky. The shockwave dispersed the clouds around the top of the mountain at a speed visible to the naked eye. It quickly spread out in a circle and spread further away. When the volcano erupted, the peaks of the few mountains near it collapsed instantly. The clouds above the mountain pass were even more vulnerable. They were completely pierced through by the black, yellow, and white rocks and dust. The sudden eruption of the volcano that had been dormant for nearly 1,000 years brought scorching hot air currents that poured down like a waterfall towards the surrounding forest. Crimson lava fiercely surged down from the mountain pass. Lightning appeared in the clouds and around the black and white smoke high up in the sky. It flickered as if there was a pair of gigantic hands holding the lightning and wantonly scribbling there. There was no pattern, and there was no intention of restraining it. More and more black smoke spewed out. The rising black smoke was like ink, dyeing the sky black. It was even more powerful and overbearing than the dark clouds. Moreover, they were expanding at an extremely terrifying speed. The ferocious beasts in the forest ran with all their might. The huge and thick ancient trees were knocked to the ground. Some of the weaker beasts were directly knocked to death. They had no time to dodge at all. The carcass of the ferocious beast that had been killed by the tree didn't even last a second. In the next moment, it was trampled into mud by an even larger beast running from behind. The tree that had caused its death was directly knocked down. The cracking sounds were like the screams of the forest. All around them were frantic beasts. Big and small, they ran without any sense of reason. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause them to crash into each other. They were already so scared that they didn't have any ability to think. They could only rely on their instincts to run away from danger. As for the rest, they could only resign themselves to fate. This kind of situation was already beyond the control of these insignificant creatures. In the place where the Yanjiao tribe was located, there were still wanderers who hadn't left with the Yanjiao team. They had stayed here for the first 2 days and felt very comfortable. They had big houses to live in, and some people had even changed the houses that the shaman and chief had lived in. Because of this, a few wanderers had even fought for a while. They went to each house and found some things that the Yanjiao people had forgotten or didn't take with them. There were some abandoned gold wares and some food. They had originally planned to search all the houses in Yanjiao and then leave for other places. They weren't really stupid. It wasn't that they didn't know the danger here. They just took the risk out of desperation. They thought that after the Yanjiao left, they would pick up the leftovers and then leave with the trophies to exchange for more things in other places. However, everything happened too fast. Before they had finished searching all the houses, the unforeseen event had already happened. The violent shaking of the ground had already caused nearly 2/3 of the houses to collapse. Among them, there were many stone houses that were once considered solid. However, under such an earthquake, they couldn't withstand it. However, the wanderers who stayed mainly lived in the core area of Yanjiao, where the chief, shaman, and leaders lived. Those houses were built by more powerful warriors. Compared to the other houses, the majority of the wanderers had survived that night. However, the remaining houses would not be able to hold out for much longer. But this time was different from the past. First, there was a shocking explosion. They didn't know what had happened. Countless beasts ran out of the forest. They were so scared that they didn't dare to go out of the house. Although there were beasts rushing out of the forest on the previous night when the moonlight was shining, there weren't as many beasts as there were now. The wanderer hiding in the shaman's house was so scared that his face was pale. Big drops of sweat fell down, and his whole body was trembling. Outside, large and small beasts ran past the house. The footsteps didn't mean to stop. Instead, they became more and more frequent. Some even directly hit the house. If the stone house hadn't been built solid, it would have collapsed. However, no matter how solid the stone house was, it couldn't withstand the continuous earthquake and the impact of the beasts. The wanderer swallowed his saliva and reached out his trembling hand. He climbed up the low table on the wall and looked at the small window on the wall. The other windows in the house had already been blocked by him. Now there was only this small window left. He moved the wooden board away from the window and looked at the sky outside. The shaman lived in a good place. There wasn't much shelter. He could see the tall stone pillar in Yanjiao and the sky. Looking outside, the fear in the wanderer's eyes rose to the extreme. At that moment, he had given up on living. In the sky, the red clouds under the morning sun were quickly dyed black. The rolling ink-like black smoke covered the sky and was spreading out of the forest. The dense flock of birds tried their best to speed up and leave this hellish place before the black smoke. However, they were still overtaken and swallowed into the darkness. The light of the day was quickly dimming. Rocks and other things were thrown out of the ejecting place like cannonballs. They smashed everywhere in the forest. Even the edge of the forest and outside the forest were not spared. The tall stone pillar that stood near the fire pit was the one that Xiao Xian rebuilt later. The original one survived the disaster 1,000 years ago, but was destroyed by the Wancher people. The new one wasn't as lucky as the old one. This time, the disaster was more serious than the one 1,000 years ago. Bang! 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 The falling stones smashed down one after another, smashing into the house and the stone pillar, causing stone chips to fly everywhere. The roars of the beasts, the explosions, and the sound of the rocks hitting each other intertwined. It was so loud that no one could hear anything else. When the last light disappeared, it was pitch black all around. The explosions continued. The panicked beasts were still frantically looking for a way out in desperation. The black smoke in the sky continued to spread. Below, it was like the end of the world. Chapter 574. At the place where Xiao Xian and the others were resting, they also heard the deafening sound of the eruption. It wasn't just at the Yanjiao team's resting place. Some tribes even further away heard it too, but they didn't know what it was. Originally, they planned to continue their journey after taking a rest. Before they left the tribe, they had discussed several times. Finally, according to the simple route left by their ancestors, they selected some places where the tectonic plate movements were not so strong. In Xiao Xian's opinion, the places outside the earthquake zone would always be safer. Xiao Xian didn't draw out a long route. Back then, their ancestors walked directly to where the drumming tribe was today. Xiao Xian's route was inland. With such strong seismic activity, he didn't know what would happen at the edge of the mainland. Although inland was also dangerous, it was safer. Now, they were only halfway along the route. They hadn't really reached the inland and were still some distance away from the big tribes. The snow falcon that delivered the letter to the Hui tribe had just returned. It came back trembling and landed on Gigu's shoulder. It wouldn't fly no matter what. Should we continue? Ao stabilized his shaking body and asked Xiao Xian. The earthquake was still going, but it was sometimes weak and sometimes strong. When it was weak, they could barely walk. When it was strong, they couldn't even stand. That was why everyone was panicking. No. Xiao Xian shook his head. He looked at the sky and said to Ao and Zheng Luo, "Continue to rest here. We might not be able to leave for a few days." The two chiefs' hearts skipped a beat. "We can't leave? What do you mean? Was there something worse?" This was the result of Xiao Xian's rope divination when the earthquake was weak before the sun appeared. At least 5 days. We might have to rest first. Tell everyone to get ready. Don't go near the cracks. Don't get separated. Take out your hats, Xiao Xian said. Although they didn't know why Xiao Xian said that, the two leaders still followed Xiao Xian's instructions. The group that was slightly scattered due to the earthquake gathered together. Food and water were distributed, and the hats that they had made before leaving the tribe were also taken out. Not long after, the sentinel exclaimed. Everyone looked in that direction. On the horizon, darkness was spreading towards them at an extremely fast speed. That direction is... Ao's voice trembled. That was the direction of the ferocious beast mountain forest, and the black sky was coming from there. The spreading blackness caused a lot of panic. What is that? What's going on? The restless, ferocious beasts and reared animals were forcibly held down. Xiao Xian comforted Caesar, and then said to old Ku, who was leaning against Caesar, "Put on your hat." It didn't take long for the black sky to spread above the group. Under the black smoke, dust and small pieces of rock fell, hitting people's hats made of different materials and making a fine tinkling sound. Because they were already some distance away from the forest, large pieces of rock wouldn't fall here. Most of it was dust and small pieces of rock. For the tribesmen, it was fine as long as they wore their hats. An old warrior covered his face with a thick linen cloth to block the flying dust. He wore a large animal skin cloak and held his child in his arms. He wrapped the cloak so that only a small mouth could be seen. Pulling on the leather rope tied to his chin, the old man pulled back the hat made of big nutshells from the forest that had been blown up by the wind. He knocked on the hat to shake off some of the dust on the hat, and then looked at where the leaders were. Although it was very dark now, he could still see some moving figures. As long as the elders, leaders, shamans, and leaders were all here, they should be fine. It had to be said that Xiao Xian's actions did indeed calm people down and reduce a lot of panic. Many people felt that the elders and shamans must have expected such a situation and must have countermeasures. In fact, Xiao Xian didn't have any countermeasures. Up until now, he had tried to predict the future with his not divination, but he hadn't succeeded. Maybe it wasn't time yet, or maybe he didn't have enough ability. He could only endure. If he could survive this ordeal, perhaps he would be able to find out more. The black smoke in the sky covered Yangguang, and the surrounding temperature dropped a little. According to Xiao Xian's divination results, the situation would remain like this for at least 5 days. Moreover, Xiao Xian knew in his heart that even if they survived this disaster and returned to the fearsome beast forest, it would be impossible for them to farm in a short period of time. As for prey, it would probably be difficult to find them. How many beasts in the forest could survive this change? If Yanjiao returned, how would they survive? Xiao Xian looked at the dark sky and thought hard. At the same time, in the distant sea, there were also some eruptions similar to the one in the fearsome beast forest. There was also black smoke spewing out, spreading from several places and finally covering everything under the black smoke. The volcano in the fearsome beast forest had its peak cut down by hundreds of meters. Moreover, as the volcanic ash and magma continued to erupt, this change continued. Waves that were hundreds of meters high rose from the surface of the sea and surged forward. Then, even higher waves followed closely behind, one after another, crashing toward the land. In the desert, darkness was spreading. Some wandering slaves were screaming in horror. They didn't know what was going on, but not long after, they couldn't scream anymore. The waves hit the desert and swallowed everything near the coast. The people who thought that they could survive and build their own power lost all hope. The people of Rock Hill City rarely cleaned up the forces near the coast. In the past, many people didn't understand. There were even some remnants of the slave masters who were rising up, but the people of Rock Hill City didn't care. Now, some people suddenly had a strange thought. Did the people of Rock Hill City know that this would happen? However, even if they were confused, they couldn't find the answer. A series of tsunamis swallowed up nearly a third of the desert. To be exact, it wasn't swallowed up. A large part of the desert that was swallowed up had disappeared along with the violent shaking of the ground. In other parts of the desert, even places that weren't hit by the tsunamis were not peaceful. Sand waterfalls that sprayed out without warning or sudden sinking of quicksand swallowed many people and beasts. Many places were in a state of panic. The calmest place was probably Rock Hill City. Even if there were big changes in the surroundings, the place where Rock Hill City was located wasn't affected much. There was an impact, but it was small. Although there was an earthquake here, it wasn't very active. There was also no quicksand or sand waterfall. The tsunami's impact had been greatly reduced not far from Rock Hill City. To Rock Hill City, it was really not a big deal. A long time ago, someone asked the king of Rock Hill City why he built a city here. With Rock Hill City's strength, they could have taken a better place. The king of Rock Hill City smiled, but didn't say anything. Every king of Rock Hill City knew the reason, but never told others. Even many of the Schur family's descendants didn't know the reason. Only the successor had the right to know. The darkness continued. As the earth quaked and mountains swayed, no one knew just how great of a change had taken place. Chapter 575. On this continent, there was almost no place that was peaceful. Xiao Xian had no way of knowing how the people in other places were doing. In this world, there was no need to expect anyone to rescue them when they encountered a disaster. You had to rely on yourself. The earthquake was still going on, and the darkness in the sky had not dissipated. 2 days had passed, but there was still no light. A thick layer of dust had accumulated on the ground. If you lay still on the ground on the first day, you would be buried by the falling dust on the second day. In the darkness, in the midst of the earthquake, large tents were set up in the tribe. Xiao Xian had made these tents before he left the tribe. The tents were made of animal skin, which was much stronger than linen. The tents were set up with specially made metal poles, which were tied with the strongest rattan ropes. The poles were tied to large stones that were carried over. 2 or 3 warriors sat on the large stones. If the stones rolled to other places due to the earthquake, they would move them back to maintain the stability of each tent. In the tents, there were children and women without totemic power, old people who could not move freely, and wounded people who had been injured in the earthquake. Many people were injured in the earthquake, and their meridians were severely damaged. If it was in the past, their injured hands and feet would be crippled, or their lives would be in danger. However, with the veins of the sky, the situation was different. Not only could they save their hands and feet, but they could also save their lives. Xiao Xian walked quickly in the team. Others needed to rely on the water moon stone to illuminate the surroundings, but he did not. If there were people who were seriously injured, he could find them faster. He called a team of people who were responsible for transporting the wounded. Xiao Xian and the others carried the injured people to the tents. Inside, Gui Zhe brought over a batch of newly made medicine and distributed it to the people who were taking care of the wounded. "How is the situation?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's okay for now. There are not many who are seriously injured." Gui Zhe handed a small pouch made of animal skin to Xiao Xian. "There are some newly made medicines inside. Distribute them to the other warriors. They will feel better." Xiao Xian opened the animal skin bag and took a look inside. The bag was filled with small pills, but the amount was smaller than usual. They had to be frugal now. No one knew what would happen later, so they had to keep some medicinal herbs in reserve. If it wasn't for the fact that his injuries were critical, he would have been more frugal with his medicine. Xiao Xian could understand this. In the past, when Xiao Xian was studying herbs in the tribe's medicine house, he had tried to make pills. Later, when everyone saw that pills were more convenient, they gradually began to adapt to such pills. As for the pills that Gui Zhe made, in the past 2 days, because of the dust falling from the sky and the unpleasant smell in the air, many people in the team had developed some minor problems. The warriors were better off, as they had a stronger resistance, so the symptoms were not obvious. However, those who had not awakened their totemic power were unlucky. They could not breathe properly, and their lungs were damaged. Even if they were covered with linen cloth, it was useless. The pills that Gui Zhe gave them were for this situation. The warriors would not stay in the tent like those who did not have totemic power. They had to be outside to guard against all kinds of dangers, and they also had to look for the injured. Their bodies were more or less affected. Although they could not see it now, it did not mean that they would be safe in the future. Therefore, it was always good to take some medicine as a precaution. When Xiao Xian went outside to distribute the pills, he bumped into Duo Kong, who was coughing. He was annoyed by the linen cloth, so he took off the linen cloth that covered most of his face. As a result, the dust that fell off was inhaled into his nose, and he choked until he almost collapsed. "It's time to take your medicine." Xiao Xian handed him a pill. "Although it's uncomfortable to cover your face with linen, it's still better than you." Xiao Xian did not need to say more. Duo Kong was already regretting it. He stuffed the pill that Xiao Xian handed him into his mouth, and took a big gulp of water from the water bottle that was hanging on his waist. The refreshing feeling dispersed the pain in his throat from coughing, and his breathing became smoother. After he recovered, Duokong sat on the ground. He did not care about the layer of dust on the ground, and asked Xiao Xian, "What should we do from now on?" Xiao Xian knew that they were starting to panic. Not only Duokong, but the others, the chief, the shaman, the various leaders, and even the soldiers who did not say anything but looked worried and anxious, were all worried. After all, they had never encountered such a thing before. After these 2 days, no one could remain calm. Xiao Xian thought for a while, and called Tua, who had just left the tent after sending the injured over. He passed the pouch with the pills to him, and asked him to distribute the rest of the pills to those who had not taken the pills. Then, like Duokong, he sat on the ground, tilted his head, and patted the layer of dust on his hat. He took out a straw rope from his pocket. When Duokong saw Xiao Xian like this, he quickly took out a water moon stone to light up the area, so that he could see more clearly. In these 2 days, Xiao Xian had also performed a divination. He could only tell that it was temporarily safe to stay here. There were 3 places where the earthquake was the strongest. One was in the fearsome beast forest, one was in the direction of the desert, and the last one was much weaker than the first 2. It was in the direction of the great river that the ancestors had taken. This place was not close to the 3 most dangerous places. Although there were earthquakes, it was enough to be a temporary resting place. Once again, Xiao Xian immersed himself in the knot divination. Perhaps it was because he had experienced so much, and the changes that happened in the past 2 days, his ability to predict things had become stronger. With his current ability, the number of things that he could divine gradually increased. Therefore, Xiao Xian was now performing 2 divinations a day. He hoped that he could divine more things. At such a time, the more he knew, the higher his chances of survival. During one of the 2 divinations a day, Xiao Xian would divine the location of the path of survival and the direction that the tribe should go. Even if he wanted to use the fire seed, it was impossible. Now that there was no fire seed, even the shamans could not know the correct path from the totemic flames in their bodies. Under the weather, the fire seed was powerless. Sometimes it was better to rely on one's intuition. Xiao Xian's intuition was to follow the path that the ancestors had taken. However, he was leading a tribe after all. If he was not confident, he would not act rashly. After the divination, Xiao Xian looked at the knot that was finally tied. He understood the meaning of the knot and felt slightly relieved. As expected. What's the result? Ao, who was watching from not far away, could not help but walk over. He just wanted to check on the wounded, but when he saw Xiao Xian sitting there with a straw rope in his hand, he suddenly understood. However, he did not dare to disturb Xiao Xian. He knew a lot, and he also understood that knot divination was not so easy to succeed. In addition, the current situation made him even more nervous, so he did not dare to take a step in that direction. Now that he saw Xiao Xian successfully tying the knot, he could not wait to come over. When the earthquake stops and the sky clears up, we will go that way. Xiao Xian pointed in a direction and said, "That way. Follow the path that the ancestors took?" Ao asked, "Yes." Chapter 576. In fact, as long as there was a definite conclusion, it would be a very good comfort. Xiao Xian's conclusion was undoubtedly a reassurance to everyone. But what followed was a complicated feeling. After all, that direction was not the direction of the old haunt. After leaving the old haunt, they couldn't go back? Were they abandoning the old haunt? For years of cultivation and construction were all gone. In the end, they couldn't stay in Yanjiao's glorious old haunt. What a depressing fact. In fact, long before the disaster began, some people were already mentally prepared. They would probably leave the old haunt like their ancestors and find a new place to live temporarily. Then, one day, their descendants would go back to the old haunt, right? But at the same time, some people had other ideas. After all, the old haunt was so attractive and cohesive, not only because it was Yanjiao's old haunt, but also because it was the fire seed. The fire seed's fire vein was in the old haunt. Back then, the fire seed was not complete. If they wanted the fire seed to be complete, they had to go back to the old haunt. But now, not only was the fire seed complete, but it had also undergone a huge change. It had been integrated into the blood of the Yanjiao people and would be passed down generation after generation with the Yanjiao people. Without the fire seed, the old haunt's meaning was still special, but it was no longer a place they had to stay. From the moment they chose to integrate the fire seed, this was the result they had decided. The earthquake under the darkness was still going on, as if the earth was carrying out some kind of plan. Under the darkness, the insignificant people had no way of knowing the truth. Only when the darkness receded and the earth stabilized could they explore. 3 days later, after a loud bang and intense shaking, the tremors began to slow down and were less frequent. After the last violent tremor, the number of injured people increased again. There were also casualties in the group. Fortunately, the number of deaths was not high. The thick black smoke in the sky began to fade after the earthquake slowed down. The change wasn't fast, but it was obvious. After a while, one could see some moving figures, even without the help of the water moon stones. This was a good sign. The team began to reorganize and count the number of people. Although the change this time was earth-shattering and made people confused, most of them survived. Even the wanderers who had been following the Yanjiao team survived. In a small tent, Xiao Xian, the shaman, the chief, and the leaders were all gathered there to decide on the next step of the plan. So far, it was almost the same as Xiao Xian's divination. Therefore, everyone did not doubt the direction that Xiao Xian said they should go in the future. However, they were still thinking about the old place, especially Ao and the others. The reconstruction of the old place was almost done by their hands little by little. But now it might all be destroyed. How about this? Xiao Xian said after thinking for a while. When the earthquake stops and the sun rises, send some people to the old haunt to check it out. Whether they can continue to live there or not, we have to be prepared. The shaman nodded in agreement. Of course, if it weren't for the fact that his body couldn't keep up, the shaman also wanted to go and check it out. However, in the current situation, it was better to hurry up. He didn't want to be a burden and let the stronger soldiers rush over. As long as they could get a result, whether it was good or bad, it could make people feel relieved. A day later, although the sky was still gray, compared to the complete darkness of the previous few days, it was much more reassuring. At least now they could tell when it was day and when it was night. The earthquake had made people dizzy and confused. They had no sense of direction or concept of time. Now, everything was finally coming back. Everything was stabilizing. Xiao Xian and the others had to take action first. They wanted to go to the old haunt. As the shaman said, they were always thinking about it. They would feel uneasy if they didn't take a look. They might feel even more uneasy if they took a look. Xiao Xian thought to himself. The team couldn't all return here, so only about 20 people were chosen. In terms of feelings for the old haunt, naturally, those who first set foot here had deeper feelings. Therefore, when choosing people, they mainly chose people from Ao's side. Although Zheng Luo's people also wanted to take a look, they weren't that obsessed. Secondly, there were more Yanjiao people here. They needed to stay here and guard. The group of 20 people ran towards the old haunt. A thick layer of dust was lifted from the ground. Everywhere they went, they left behind a trail of dust. The dust in the sky hadn't dispersed completely. Yang Guang couldn't see clearly, but it was enough for him to see everything around him. If it wasn't for the blurry sun in the sky, they wouldn't be able to tell where they were. Everything had changed. The ground rose and fell. The low ground had become high cliffs. The few hills they passed on the way were still there, but others had disappeared. There were no living things on the ground. Perhaps there were bones buried under the thick dust. Perhaps there were lives that survived the disaster. Occasionally, some birds could be seen flying in the sky. It gave people a feeling of confusion. At this time, those who were hiding didn't have the courage to come out immediately. Xiao Xian and the others returned to the old haunt. They didn't see anyone else. This is it. Xiao Xian stopped and looked ahead. Here, you're saying this is Yanjiao's old haunt. How is that possible? Ao was so shocked that he almost jumped up. The shock in his eyes was obvious. His face was trembling as he tried his best to turn his head and look at everything in front of him. In front of them, it was the same as the other places they had passed. It was even more flat. Other than the color of the dust on the ground, it looked like a desert. But Xiao Xian said this was the old haunt. Ao began to tremble all over. Xiao Xian took 2 steps forward. Then he pulled out his sword and swept away the thick dust under his feet. Under the dust, there were many pieces of gravel that couldn't be seen clearly. Some of them were stained with brown blood. Perhaps they were left behind by the beasts that had fled from the forest. Or perhaps they were left behind by the wanderers who hadn't left. Xiao Xian could see through the layer of dust and see a little of the scene below. In places where the ground bulged, there were piles of stones from collapsed buildings. There were also corpses of giant beasts that had already died. The giant beasts that had once been so arrogant in the forest couldn't escape this disaster. Under the power of heaven and earth, all living things were ants. Perhaps there were all kinds of creatures in the depths of the forest that had escaped this disaster. But right now, the Yanjiao people were only concerned about the ruins of the old haunt. Even if there were other places in the forest where people could continue to live, they were no longer the old haunt. In the hearts of the Yanjiao people, they were no longer the old haunt. The black dust under his feet had a pungent smell. Xiao Xian picked up a stone and pulled it up. It was only half a meter long and incomplete. If it weren't for the patterns on it, Xiao Xian wouldn't have recognized it. This was the stone pillar that he had personally engraved the patterns on. Now, the stone pillar had fallen, and the cracks were even more severe than the one that had been destroyed by Wan Shi. There were already many craters on this piece of wreckage, and the original patterns had been destroyed. One could only imagine the situation at that time. This was much more terrifying than what their ancestors had encountered. Although the old haunt had changed a lot after their ancestors left, many things had been preserved. The forest was still there. But now, as far as the eye could see, there was only one word to describe it: destruction. It was a complete and utter destruction. After 4 years, all traces of life were gone. The dense forest and towering mountain peaks were all gone. All that was left was a wasteland. Even Ao, who had always been calm and steady, couldn't help but choke with sobs. Some of the warriors cried. Pitter-patter, pitter-patter. Drops of rain fell from the sky and soon became rapid. The raindrops hit the wasteland, splashing up a lot of dust. There was a lingering smell of destruction in the air. The rain began to wash away the haze in the sky. Some gray rain fell on Xiao Xian's face, leaving mud-like marks. A group of 20 people stood in the rain in silence for nearly an hour. Then they knelt towards the land, performing the highest ceremony of the tribe, offering sacrifice and farewell. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to live here again in their lifetime. Perhaps, one day in the future, their descendants would bring the tribe back to this homeland that had been restored. Even if there were still unstable factors lurking here, an old place was still an old place. This was the persistence of the tribesmen. The rain became heavier, and the dust on the ground turned into mud. After kneeling on the ground, the group of people were covered in black mud. But at this time, no one cared. When they got up, the sorrow in their eyes had disappeared, and what was left was determination. There was still a road behind them. They had only walked a small part of that road, and the rest of the tribe was waiting for them. Looking at the old haunt on the wasteland again, the group of 20 people turned and left. Chapter 577. When they returned to the team, the weather had begun to clear up. After the continuous darkness and turbidity, they saw the clear sky again, which made them feel much more relaxed. A rainbow appeared in the distance. However, at this time, no one wanted to take a look at those wonders at all. They were all worried about the future. During the time when Xiao Xian and the others left for the old haunt, several groups of people were sent out to inquire about the situation in different directions. Knowing more information about other places would be beneficial for Yanjiao's later actions. When Xiao Xian and the others returned from the old haunt, several groups that had gone out also came back one after another not long after them. According to them, there wasn't a single place that wasn't damaged. However, some tribes suffered heavy losses, and the terrain changed greatly. The ground cracked and countless houses collapsed, and some even disappeared. However, some places didn't suffer as much damage. The most obvious ones were the places where the large tribes were located. Some small and medium-sized tribes were hit to varying degrees, but comparatively speaking, the big tribes, such as the Mang tribe, the Eight Limbs tribe, the Longboat tribe, and so on, suffered some losses, but to the whole tribe, it was not too big of a blow, and didn't hurt their bones. Where they were, the earthquake was not too violent. In terms of degree, it was probably similar to where we were resting. The returning soldiers said, "I heard that thousands of years ago, many tribes were not in their current positions. For example, the Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe were not close to each other. They migrated later." Ao said, in the past 4 years, he had learned a lot of information from the people in the traveling group. It seems that they also migrated at that time. It's just that they did not migrate far away and occupied several relatively stable places. That's why they suffered less damage during the catastrophe. Xiao Xian said, "Every tribe settled down for a reason. They wouldn't settle down there for no reason. Just like how the flaming horns used to live in the fearsome beast forest, they hunted for prey. For a tribe that no longer hunted for a living, a relatively stable land with fertile soil and a water source was a very good place to settle down. No wonder those tribes didn't do anything. They were already prepared." The shaman sighed. It was because the ancestors of those few tribes had occupied several relatively stable and convenient places to develop during the earthquake that they were able to avoid the disaster of that year and this time. However, some small tribes that happened to be in the areas where the earthquake was intense were unlucky, and some of them were even exterminated. That's why a good place is so important. The two shamans sighed in unison. However, how could a good place be so easy to find? Back then, Yanjiao lived in the ferocious beast mountain forest, which was far away from the few places where the earthquake was relatively weak. They didn't have time to fight for territory, so later on, the tribe had to travel far away to find a place to live. So where would Yanjiao go this time? In fact, as early as when Xiao Xian pointed in that direction, Wu and Ao had thought that it might be the place where they used to live, but they immediately denied it. After all, there was still a river that they couldn't see on the other side of. At this time of the year, how could they get there? Or would they have to wait another year to get there? After the people who went out returned, the group set off again. This time, they went directly in the direction that Xiao Xian had pointed out. The old land had been destroyed, and they couldn't go back to live in the short term. They had to find a new place to start over. Although the old land had been destroyed, the harvest of the past 4 years couldn't be erased. Pottery, metalware, textiles, farming, breeding, and so on had made great progress. After being isolated from the world, Yanjiao people were like dry sponges, crazily absorbing everything. In the past 4 years, too many changes had happened, especially the fire seed. Without the power of the fire seed, would the group disperse? This was a huge stone hanging in the hearts of the shaman and the chief. However, they had to take it one step at a time. First, they had to find a new place to live. Xiao Xian looked at the new knot. He just wanted to confirm where the road was. "How is it?" The two chiefs next to him stared at Xiao Xian nervously. "Follow the original plan. Keep going in that direction." Xiao Xian balled up the rope in his hand and squeezed it with his fingers, crushing the knotted rope into bits of grass. In fact, Xiao Xian had thought about whether the knot divination was pointing to the place where they had lived in the past. After all, in terms of living conditions, it was indeed a very good place. It was very suitable for the Yanjiao people. Otherwise, the Yanjiao tribe wouldn't have been able to live there for nearly 1,000 years and still be living well. However, the river was the biggest obstacle. The long group continued to move in that direction. Many of the carriages and ox carts had been destroyed in the disaster, so they couldn't accommodate more people. Sometimes they used animals to carry the injured. Along the way, they encountered many robbers. However, Yanjiao had many people and tight defenses, so they didn't let the robbers succeed. Most of the robbers were from small tribes. The disaster of their tribes was almost a devastating blow to them. They had no food and no manpower, so they could only crazily fight for the loot. Yanjiao's route was different from when they first went to the old haunt. After all, they spent more time on boats back then, but now they were walking. Some of the big and small rivers that had dried up were now gradually rising. Although they didn't know what was going on, this trend was always good. The Yanjiao tribe moved again. The news of the destruction of Yanjiao's old haunt was spread by some long-distance trading teams. More and more people knew about it. Naturally, there were people who were doubtful. Along the way, they even met people from the longboat tribe who came over and said that they could help, provided that Yanjiao gave them something in exchange. The longboat tribe was after the green-faced fanged beasts. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts in Yanjiao's group were drugged when they left the tribe. When the earthquake happened, the 7 beasts were unconscious. Now, they seemed to be waking up. Fortunately, they were enslaved by Xiao Xian, so their aggression was restrained. After the longboat tribe brought back the green-faced fanged beasts they caught in the mountains, they tried to forge them. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed. However, they learned some things and wanted to try again, but they didn't have the materials. Coincidentally, Yanjiao's disaster happened, so they wanted to take this opportunity to make a deal. Yanjiao refused. Most of the longboat tribe's ships were damaged, and they didn't have enough materials to rebuild them. After all, although the earthquake didn't affect them much and they didn't have many casualties, many trees were destroyed. They were short on materials. If they built a ship now, the quality would be lacking. Yanjiao didn't want to make this deal. They wouldn't tell the other tribes the secret of the new bronze wares. Even if they needed a ship, they could make it themselves. However, building a ship took time and a lot of materials. If they couldn't complete it, it was better to travel on foot. Besides, the water level in each river was rising. It wasn't as deep as it used to be. It might not be convenient to sail on it. Other than the longboat tribe, the other tribes also had the same idea. However, they were all busy with their own affairs. They didn't lose much in the disaster, but they didn't lose much either. They had to reorganize, so they couldn't take care of Yanjiao for the time being. Days passed. When the Yanjiao team finally arrived at the drumming tribe was busy with reconstruction work. When they heard the whistle from the patrolling warriors, they thought it was an enemy invasion. They didn't expect it to be the Yanjiao people they hadn't seen in a few years. Chapter 578. The people of the drumming tribe had a deep impression of Yanjiao. They didn't have much contact with other tribes, but Yanjiao's appearance that year was too special. They even helped them, so they remembered clearly. However, the last time they saw the Yanjiao tribe, there weren't so many people. The people of the drumming tribe were happy to see Xiao Xian again after 4 years, especially Fu Shi, who was familiar with Xiao Xian. But when they saw the Yanjiao team, they couldn't help but be curious. "You're migrating again? They just moved here 4 years ago, and now they want to leave again?" This tribe migrated too frequently. Although it was because of the natural disaster, the frequency of migration was too high for the tribesmen. Fu Shi's words were unintentional, but it made the Yanjiao people's faces bitter. If they weren't forced to do so, who would be willing to give up 4 years of hard work to build their homeland and come all the way here again? The closer they got, the more familiar Ao, Gigu, Ta, and the others felt. A thought rose in their minds again. Could it be that they really had to go back to where they lived before? The more they thought about it, the faster their hearts beat. Compared to finding a new place, they obviously preferred their old forest. Even if there were some shortcomings, tribesmen were nostalgic, especially for land. One could imagine how they felt at this moment. So before Fu Shi could say anything, Ao asked, "Is there any change in the river? Have the river beasts returned? Can the boat sail on it?" Ao's series of questions made Fu Shi's expression strange. The warriors of the drumming tribe beside him also had complicated expressions. Xiao Xian saw this and asked, "What's wrong? What's changed in the river?" "Change? Of course." Fu Shi pointed in the direction of the river. "Did you notice that the sound of the river changed?" "The sound of the river?" Because they didn't often move around in the water, Yanjiao people were weaker than the drumming tribe in this aspect. "I didn't hear it," Ao said honestly. Fu Shi didn't look down on him. His eyes showed a complicated expression. "The sound of the river is gone. In other words, the river is no longer there." At this point, Fu Shi also sighed. Back then, when they left the riverbank to seek refuge, they were almost thrown out by the earthquake. They tied themselves and their families to tree trunks or higher terrain. There were many mountains here and few flat lands. Even if they wanted to hide, they would hide from one mountain to another. No one wanted to leave this place and go further away. Because the fire seed was here, no one was willing to go further away. Later, everything stopped. When he tried to go to the riverbank, he found that their former village had been destroyed. All the houses had collapsed. If they hadn't escaped in time and stayed far away from the riverbank like the crocodiles, perhaps many of them would have been buried in the disaster not long ago. What shocked them even more was what happened on the other side of the river. At that time, Fu Shi and the other warriors of the drumming tribe stood by the riverbank and looked forward. Everywhere they looked, the scenery had changed. The Yanjiao people were prepared to wait another year, but when they heard Fu Shi's words, they were all shocked. Even Xiao Xian wondered if they should wait for another year until the rainy season ended and boats could travel on the river. Along the way, they had discussed how to build a boat, but now, Fu Shi said that the river had disappeared. This shocked the Yanjiao people so much that they doubted their own ears. How could such a huge river disappear just like that? Moreover, according to what the drumming tribe said, all the changes were only completed in those 5 days, under the condition of day and night. "I'll take you to see it," Fusher sighed and walked over. Letting the people in the team stay here, Xiao Xian and the two chiefs went to the riverbank together. There were crocodiles of all sizes moving around. A brown-eyed crocodile quickly crawled over to Xiao Xian. It was the little crocodile from before. After a few years, it had grown a lot. At first sight, it didn't recognize Xiao Xian, but after Fusher's reminder, Xiao Xian recognized it. But now Xiao Xian was thinking about the river. He patted the brown-eyed crocodile's head and quickly followed Fusher. The drumming tribe's original residence had been destroyed. If it wasn't destroyed in the earthquake, then it was buried by the mudslide brought by the rain. In short, it was uninhabitable and had to be rebuilt. Fortunately, most of the people were still there, and the fire seed was still there. This was already the best result. It's there. See for yourselves. Fusher pointed ahead. In front of them was a small hill, but there was no way to see the other side. Walking up the hill, there were no other obstacles in front of them. Xiao Xian could see clearly what was on the other side. It's really. Ao's voice trembled. Gigu Ta and the others were all in disbelief. Who wouldn't be shocked to see such a big river suddenly become a small river and still be able to see the scenery on the other side? It's really there. Ta was too excited and stuttered. The others couldn't understand, but the Yanjiao people knew. The other side was where they used to live. The mountain seemed to have become taller, and there were many uneven places at the foot of the mountain. Rocks with edges protruded from the ground, like ferocious beasts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Further up, they could see the traces of their lives, even if the houses had collapsed. Their heavy breathing, red faces, and the excitement of the Yanjiao people puzzled Fusher. That's where we used to live. Ao took a deep breath. The pain and sorrow of the destruction of the old homeland faded when he saw the situation on the other side. They had lived in the old homeland for 4 years, but on the other side, they had lived for decades. How could they not have feelings? When they left that year, they had thought that after leaving, they would probably never come back. Even though the shaman said that the Yanjiao could use that place as a backup plan, and if they didn't do well, they could go back. But later, after the Yanjiao tribes returned to the old homeland and developed better and better, they gradually stopped thinking about the other side. Occasionally, they would still dream of the place where they used to live, the dangerous forest, and the familiar hunting routes. I didn't expect this, ha ha ha. I didn't expect this. Ao took another deep breath, and then let out a long breath, as if he was spitting out all the depression in his heart. It's here, right? Xian. Ao stared at the other side of the river and said, Yes, it's here. Xiao Xian was now sure that the result of the divination was there. Years ago, the ancestors left the old homeland due to a natural disaster and came here. As a result, the earth cracked and the river formed, cutting off their path of return. And now, 1,000 years later, there was another change that was even greater than back then. The earth that had been split open was now closed. The river that had existed for 1,000 years was gone. Only a small trace was left, a small river that wasn't too deep or wide, and one could see the scenery on the other side of the river. There was probably no other backup plan that could comfort the Yanjiao people more than this. Chapter 579. When the tribe crossed the river, many of the children were still young. For years later, some of them had already become totemic warriors. Now that they knew what was on the other side of the river, and that was the destination of the tribe, the Yanjiao people who lived on the other side of the river were no longer depressed. Their moods had been fluctuating all this time. Even though the crisis was over, they had no place to stay. They were like rootless duckweeds, unable to settle down. But now they could finally let go. They couldn't go back to the old place, but it was fine. They had another old place. Yes, for the entire Yanjiao tribe, the fearsome beast forest was the Yanjiao's old place. But for these people, the other side of the river was another old place in their hearts. Even though there were some changes in the earthquake, even though they couldn't see the whole thing from here, they could still recognize many familiar places. That's right, that was the other homeland in their hearts. Ao, Ta, Guihe, Mai, and the rest of the team leaders were all very excited about the turn of events. Chief, are we going back? Someone asked, choking. The word go back moved many people, and they couldn't help but smile. Ao also showed a rare look of nostalgia. Yes, let's go back. Awuh, someone in the group screamed. Haha, let's go back. Some of the younger warriors jumped up in excitement. They thought they would have to find a new place to stay, but they didn't expect to come back here. They were still children when they left. For years later, they had been out hunting for a year or two. Seeing their excitement, Zheng Luo and the others calmed down. After all, they hadn't lived there before, and all they knew was from other people. "That's where you used to live?" Zheng Luo asked Xiaoxian. "I can't believe it changed like this." But then they remembered that there was a large forest on the other side, and it was no less dangerous than the fearsome beast forest. There were even king beasts roaming around, and many other strange places. Zheng Luo and the others didn't feel any fear. Instead, they rubbed their palms together, their eyes shining. "It's a good place." Duokong only glanced over and commented. Although he couldn't see the place he had heard of, with his many years of hunting experience, it was definitely a satisfactory place. Even the wind from the opposite shore carried a dangerous smell. It really made people look forward to it. "There are ferocious beasts over there." Duokang's hands were itching again. For people who hunted for a living, hunting had become a habit in their daily life. Once this habit was broken, and they did not touch it for a long time, they would feel itchy to hunt. He missed the smell of the jungle. Hearing Duokang's words, Fusher laughed. "You can smell the beasts from here?" "Of course," Duokong said confidently. "It smells like the fearsome beast forest." Fusher smiled and didn't say much. He turned to Xiaoxian and asked, "Can you smell it?" Xiaoxian stared at the opposite shore, deep in thought. "Yes, I can feel the ferocious beasts over there." After a pause, Xiaoxian added, "The smell is quite familiar." Just as Xiaoxian finished speaking, Caesar squeezed over and looked at the opposite shore for a while. Then he raised his head and howled. Caesar's sudden howl brought the Yanjiao back to reality. He smiled and said, "Even Caesar remembers the old place." Of course, Caesar grew up there too. Mai couldn't hide the smile on his face. He remembered that the few ferocious beasts in the tribe who used the secret technique of carving also grew up there. If people missed it, so did the ferocious beasts. However, Xiaoxian didn't see it that way. Caesar's howl was not a sign of nostalgia. But before he could say anything, Ao couldn't wait to ask Fusher again. "Didn't you go over to take a look?" After all, the river was gone. The two sides were so close, and the river wasn't deep. Just now, he saw the crocodiles moving in the river, which meant that there were no dangerous beasts in the river. Otherwise, the crocodiles wouldn't have been so comfortable. Speaking of this, Fusher smiled helplessly. "Why didn't we go over?" In fact, when we saw such a huge change in the river, we thought about going over to take a look. After all, we could see some traces of life on the mountain over there. At that time, our chief thought that since there was a tribe on the other side and we were so close, we should at least say hello and see if there was anyone on the other side who needed help. There were indeed traces of life on the other side. There were houses, pillars that acted as sundials, and other unnatural things at a glance. But at that time, the disaster had just passed and the earthquake had slowed down. Many tribes were seriously affected by the disaster. The people on the other side didn't appear, so they thought about going over to take a look. So, at that time, the drumming tribe sent a group of people over on the crocodiles. They didn't know if there were any dangerous creatures in the river. What the crocodiles weren't afraid of didn't mean they weren't afraid of. Riding on the crocodiles was the safest way. But then, as soon as we came ashore and shouted a few words, we were chased back. Fusher sighed. "Chase back?" Ao's voice suddenly rose. His eyebrows were almost raised, and his whole body released a clear, murderous aura. "Someone's there?" The other chief's first thought was similar to Ao's. Could it be that someone took advantage of the huge change in the river and went over first? Did they want to steal Yanjiao's territory? If it was somewhere else, it would be fine. But that place was another old haunt in the hearts of half of the Yanjiao people. How could they allow others to covet it? No matter who it was, if they couldn't chase them away, then they would beat them up. If they couldn't beat them away, then they would kill them. This was no longer an ordinary fight for territory. This was Yanjiao's reverse scale. Anyone who touched it would die. Seeing the sudden surge of murderous aura in the Yanjiao team, Fusher hurriedly explained, "No, we didn't see anyone over there. We were chased here by fearsome beasts." Fearsome beasts? Without the protection of the fire seed, it made sense that the fearsome beasts would go over there. The murderous aura in the Yanjiao team was slightly restrained, but they couldn't. Not even the fearsome beasts. Kill them all the same. "What does that fearsome beast look like?" Ao asked in a bad tone. The Yanjiao people touched the hilts of their swords, thinking about how to kill it. Fusher said, "We only saw one. It was a very big eagle, very fierce. It came out to patrol every day." Eagle? Ao was silent for a moment. Flying beasts were indeed not easy to hunt. "Look, it's coming again." A drumming tribe warrior next to Fusher pointed to the sky and shouted, "Hey, why is it flying over here?" Fusher exclaimed, "Wasn't that eagle only guarding the other side of the river? Why is it suddenly flying over? And it's so fast." Seeing this, the drumming tribe and Yanjiao people all picked up their swords, axes, and bows. "Wait, everyone, don't attack. It's an old friend." Xiao Xian hurriedly stopped them. "Old friend?" Ao didn't react at first, but then he thought of something. His eyes suddenly widened as he looked up at the sky. Caesar looked up at the sky and howled excitedly again. However, as the figure in the sky flew closer and closer, Caesar's howl changed midway, as if he was forcibly making a bend. There was a hint of doubt in his voice. "Huh, it looked a lot bigger. You're tuning in to the Blee Maze Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."